Chapter 398. The little fellow was sensible. In addition to knowing not to cause trouble for Dad, she even learned how to comfort Dad. Therefore, after Nian entered that sweet dreamland, Xianxia let out a soft sigh in this dark room. Dad, don't be sad, Mom will get better. The little fellow had already fallen asleep, but her words kept echoing in Xianxia's ears. Xianxia silently savored this sentence. After a long time, he was like the prince who kissed Snow White in the fairy tale, kissing the little fellow and Qin Ruing's face one by one, then got up and left the room. As soon as he opened the door, a cold wind mixed with snowflakes suddenly hit his face. It started to snow in Shangjing City again. Xianxia withdrew his vital essence, allowing the cold wind to wantonly enter his sleeves, and silently felt the chill brought by the cold wind. The whole sky was dark. There was only a little bit of weak moonlight which seemed so cold. Xianxia set up a restriction in the room so that he could know the situation of Qin Ruing at the first moment. Then he flew directly into the dark night sky. He flew very fast, and in the blink of an eye he had already flown out of Wuxia and arrived above the Pacific Ocean. And the destination of his trip? Obviously, it was the waterless cave located in the deep sea. Deep in the cave, Bai Hong and Qing Wan were still like suffering Jesus, hanging high above the cave by Xianxia. Xianxia didn't want to kill indiscriminately, so he kept them here. Because of the suppression of the spirit needles and spirit-piercing needles, the injuries of the two people did not get any treatment but worsened a lot, so they looked very bad. Being in prison was actually a very terrifying thing, especially this kind of cage that was similar to a small dark room. Unable to see the sun, unable to communicate with people. In this cramped and oppressive space, the most frightening and tormenting thing was actually loneliness. Qing Wan's injuries were more serious, so she could only be awake for about 2 or 3 hours a day, and at other times she was in a self-protective coma. Xianxia came at the right time today, just when Qing Wan was awake. Bai Hong and Qing Wan were talking in a low voice. As soon as they heard the movement caused by Xianxia flying out of the cold pool, a trace of fear flashed across their faces. Yes, Divine General Tiandu was also afraid. After a long period of confinement, they had developed a fear of Xianxia. They were not afraid of death, but they were afraid of this endless loneliness. Come, kill me, kill me. The moment Xianxia appeared, Qing Wan was like an enraged beast, crazily roaring at Xianxia. As he roared, he spat at Xianxia in an attempt to infuriate Xianxia so that she would kill him. Do you want to die so much? Then I to you, Qing to Tiandu to Tiandu to be to kill to Tiandu to die to be killed. Then a stream of qi like a heavy hammer smashed into Qing Wan's chest. Qing Wan was already injured, and after suffering such a heavy blow, she immediately spat out a large mouthful of blood. She could only hang her head weakly, and it seemed that she had lost half of her life. Stop. You're going to kill him like this. Seeing this, Bai Hong could not help but be anxious. Although she also had the idea of dying early and being free, it was just a thought. Even ants craved for life, not to mention them, the divine generals. Bai Hong did not want to die, and was even more unwilling to see Qing Wan die in front of her. Xianxia would not come for no reason. Today he suddenly came, there must be something to ask. Therefore, after a strong struggle in her mind, Bai Hong asked in a tone that was close to begging for mercy, "What do you want to know? As long as it does not involve the core of Tiandu, I can tell you without reservation." Is that so? Hearing this, Xianxia smiled with satisfaction. But that smile, it looked a little cold. I want to know everything about the sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror. Can you tell me? As he spoke, Xianxia slowly rose from the ground and then flew straight to Qing Wan. He was obviously talking to Bai Hong, but he used his qi to lift Qing Wan's head, and began to size up this poor divine general who was covered in wounds. Bai Hong of course understood what Xianxia meant. If she kept silent, Xianxia would obviously use the soul-sucking technique on Qing Wan. Seeing this, Bai Hong replied rather straightforwardly, "Sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror? No problem, I can tell you, that is the treasure left behind by the divine ancestor, we now call it soul mirror." Soul mirror. Xianxia repeated this name, then frowned and asked, "What is its use?" Hearing this, Bai Hong immediately answered honestly, "The 5 great temples and the 13 soul-gathering cauldrons are all related to the soul mirror. Simply put, you can see it as the key to open the gate of heaven. Don't blame me for not telling you. Although the soul mirror is a treasure, it has no practical use. Apart from when it is needed to open the gate of heaven, it can only be placed in the imperial hall as a decoration. Bai Hong thought that Xianxia was after the divine ancestor's treasure, so she couldn't help but remind him. However, after hearing this, Xianxia continued to ask, "If I were to ascend from the lower realm and enter the gate of heaven, where would I appear? Where is the imperial hall? Who is usually in charge of the soul mirror? What is this person's cultivation? Are there any other defensive arrangements around it?" Bai Hong was stunned by Xianxia's series of questions. He stared blankly at Xianxia for a long while before saying in shock, "You're actually thinking about the soul mirror?" Xianxia roared impatiently, "Answer my question." Bai Hong was really scared. Looking at Xianxia's attitude, he really wanted to go to the imperial hall to snatch the soul mirror. What kind of place was the imperial hall? That was the core of the divine capital, equivalent to the emperor's throne room. Are you crazy? Bai Hong looked at Xianxia speechlessly. At this moment, Xianxia looked like a bloodthirsty gambler. Seeing that Bai Hong was unwilling to answer, he actually pressed his hand on Qing Wan's head and used the soul-snatching technique. In fact, the soul-snatching technique was not as exaggerated as Xianxia had said before. This technique had a lot of restrictions. After using it, one could only inquire about some insignificant surface information. If it involved important secrets, the target's soul would automatically hide it, making the caster unable to pry. Since Qing Wan was a divine general of the divine capital, he obviously had a detailed understanding of the layout of the imperial hall. To Qing Wan, the imperial hall was no secret at all. Naturally, it would not be deliberately protected by his soul. Chapter 399. He saw. The moment Xianxia pressed his palm on Qing Wan's head, Qing Wan seemed to have been electrocuted. Her body twitched violently in the unconscious state. Bai Hong was stunned. He never thought that Xianxia would actually really deal such a vicious blow to Qing Wan. Stop. At that instant, Bai Hong's eyes were about to split. However, due to the suppression of the soul-setting needle, he could only watch as the azure Wan was tortured. Bai Hong struggled with all her might, her eyes flashing with uncontrollable anger. He gnashed his teeth so hard that they creaked, and he looked like a ferocious beast that had lost all reason due to rage. He wished for nothing more than to pounce forward and tear Xianxia into pieces. But unfortunately, this was just Bai Hong's wishful thinking. Xianxia was like a cold robot. He completely ignored the pain and anger in his heart and searched for all the information in Cyan Phoenix's mind. Since it was a forced soul search, this secret technique would naturally put a huge burden on the target's divine soul. Therefore, it didn't take long before blood began to seep out of the 7 orifices of the green phoenix, just like when Xianxia forcibly perceived the entire world. Bai Hong stared blankly as everything unfolded. He didn't understand the soul-snatching secret technique and thought that what Xianxia had said to scare him was true. Bai Hong could accept that Xianxia had directly killed Qing Wan because their skills were not as good as his. But he couldn't accept it. Xianxia used this method to torture Qing Wan. Absolutely not. I'm going to kill you. I'll kill you. Ah. Anger gives strength as long as it is not mixed with the hesitation and apprehension of the weak. It was precisely because of this. Bai Hong, who was already on the verge of death, actually burst out with an extremely strong true essence fluctuation from his body. This surge of true essence was too ferocious, and it actually shook off the golden needles that Xianxia had inserted into his body one by one. Xianxia didn't even have time to withdraw the secret method from Qing Wan's body before Bai Hong rushed towards him like a tiger that had just escaped from its cage. Die. Bai Hong's face was strangely flushed. As soon as he broke free, his body constantly emitted a strong true essence fluctuation. Bai Hong's current state was very strange. He was clearly wounded all over and there was barely a tenth of the Zhenyuan left in his body, but he was still able to release Zhenyuan fluctuations that were far stronger than when he was at his peak. Before it could attack, the true essence slammed into the wall again and again, causing the entire cave to tremble violently. After Bai Hong let out a roar, he immediately waved his right hand and slapped Xianxia's head fiercely. At this time, Xianxia, who sensed the abnormality, hurriedly withdrew his secret technique and took Bai Hong's palm strike head-on. Bang! In an instant there was a violent explosion in the cave. Xianxia was actually forced to retreat more than 10 meters. Are you crazy? Looking at this divine general of Tiandu who was on the verge of going crazy, it was Xianxi's turn to be surprised. Bai Hong is burning his own yuanying. Yuanying was the result of a cultivator's painstaking cultivation, and it was also the foundation of their abilities. Even if they died, as long as their yuanying was not extinguished, a cultivator would still have a chance to be reborn. Therefore, for a cultivator, yuanying represented everything even more important than life. Burning yuanying meant giving up everything that he had worked so hard for hundreds or even thousands of years. This kind of damage was irreversible. Once his yuanying was burned out, even if Bai Hong was lucky enough to survive today, he would not be able to cultivate from now on. And for a cultivator, what was the difference between this and death? Bai Hong simply wanted to fight to the death with Xianxia, not stopping until one of them was dead. Seeing this, Xianxia finally calmed down. After taking a deep look at Bai Hong, he asked in a slightly strange tone, "Burning yuanying? Since you're so desperate, then I admit defeat, okay? Actually, I didn't want to kill you. This secret technique won't harm your life, it's just to scare you. How about this, let's talk nicely. Admit defeat?" Hearing this, Bai Hong could not help but be stunned. But after thinking about it, he thought that Xianxia was deliberately stalling for time, so he immediately attacked Xianxia again. Seeing this, Xianxia uncharacteristically turned around and ran. He had no intention of fighting with Bai Hong at all. Trying to be a hero depended on the situation. Since Bai Hong had already burned his yuanying, Xianxia only needed to temporarily avoid the attack. After half an hour, Bai Hong would probably collapse because of his yuanying. Bai Hong clearly knew this, so he wanted to fight to the death with Xianxia before his yuanying burned out. But what he did not expect was, Xianxia was running faster than a rabbit at this moment. His cultivation level was much higher than Bai Hong's. Now that he was determined to run, how could Bai Hong easily catch up to him? Thus the two of them began a game of cat and mouse in the deep sea. Xianxia was like walking a dog on an electric scooter. From time to time he would turn around and send a voice transmission to Bai Hong, "Calm down, let's talk nicely. If you stop now, you should still be saved. You saw it too, if I'm determined to run, you won't be able to catch me at all. I advise you not to be so stubborn. When the nascent soul is burned up, I will be able to decide whether I want to kill him or not. I see that you're a man, I don't want to take your life, so I advise you." Under Xianxia's constant persuasion, Bai Hong finally stopped. He could not catch up and he could not beat him. What else could he do? He was also very desperate. The two confronted each other across the trench. After a long while, only then did Bai Hong say in a deep voice, "I only have one request. If you agree, you can kill me or cut me up as you wish in the future. If not, I can only fight to the death with you." In this regard, Xianxia was very magnanimous, so he responded readily, "Okay, say it. Don't use such despicable means again, or I won't let you go even if I become a ghost." Xianxia naturally did not take Bai Hong's threat to heart. However, he still gave Bai Hong a definite answer. "I can promise you, but there's a condition. You must make a heart demon oath and promise that you won't hide anything from me. You must answer all the questions I ask you in full detail. If you hide anything, you will be swallowed by the oath." Hearing this, Bai Hong did not immediately answer. Instead, his eyes flickered and no one knew what he was thinking. Of course, Xianxia knew what he was thinking, so he immediately added, "Don't worry, I have no interest in going against Tiandu. The reason why I want the soul mirror is entirely because of my wife. She is the arbiter of fate, Xian Nu. So, do you understand?" After hearing Xianxia's words, Bai Hong's expression softened. Because of the arbiter of fate, Xian Nu? So that's why. Bai Hong thought seriously for a while, and after receiving Xianxia's repeated assurances, he finally stopped his suicidal behavior. Although the yuanying had not yet burned out, it had caused extremely serious damage that was almost irreversible. Therefore, the moment Bai Hong removed his inner yuan, he seemed to have aged many years, and his appearance changed from that of a young man in his 20s to that of a middle-aged man in his 40s. When Xianxia saw his sickly appearance and that even flying was a problem, he kindly helped him stabilize his injuries and flew him back to the cave. On the way back, Bai Hong seemed to have finally figured something out, and he suddenly turned to Xianxia and said, "You have the strength of a celestial venerable. Tiandu shouldn't make an enemy of you for no reason. Since everything you've done is for your wife, I can tell you where the soul mirror is. I only hope that you can keep your promise." Hearing this, Xianxia was overjoyed and he hurriedly asked, "No problem. As long as you can cure my wife, everything is negotiable." "If Nothing unexpected happens. The soul mirror should still be in my junior brother's hands. Your junior brother? Where is he? Did he come down with you? When we came, junior brother was still cultivating with master. Now that we haven't returned to Tiandu yet, I'm sure master will personally come down to check. When that time comes, junior brother might come with him. Alright, what's your junior brother's name? I'll make a note of it so that I can find him in the future. He's called Wuxia. What? Wuxia. The moment she heard this name, Xianxia's entire body felt unwell. Chapter 400. Even if Baihong burned his Yuanying, he was still no match for Xianxia. Xianxia avoided him because he did not want to waste his energy. After all, if he could solve the problem peacefully, why would he need to resort to violence? The result was, of course, a happy ending. Baihong's life was saved, and Xianxia also got the answer he wanted. However, the moment he got the answer, Xianxia did not feel good. The sky-bearing technique and floating dawn mirror was actually in Wuxia's hands? If he had known this would happen, Xianxia would have left Wuxia on Daiyu Island even if he burned his Yuanying that day. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. Wuxia had already escaped, and at this moment he might be hiding in some dark corner of the earth, laughing secretly. Now that things had come to this, Xianxia's regret was useless. Therefore he could only hope that he could successfully find Wuxia and get the soul mirror from him. Since Yingying's illness was related to the soul mirror, he had to get the soul mirror no matter what method he used. For this reason, Xianxia even had the dangerous idea of fighting his way to Tiandu. In fact, Xianxia did not want to be enemies with anyone. Just like what he taught Nian on a daily basis. We do not cause trouble, but we are definitely not afraid of trouble. And this was also his daily principle. I avoided it only because I had a family. I did not want my family to take any unknown risks. The money, status, and power of the mortal world were meaningless to Xianxia. Similarly, the rare treasures, cultivation techniques, and elixirs of the cultivation world were also dispensable to Xianxia. After all, with Nian and Yingying he already had the whole world. Why should he care about these worldly possessions? Xianxia wanted to avoid the world. Not escape but avoid. Avoid all unnecessary trouble. But unfortunately, avoiding was not the way to solve the problem. Since the problem had already appeared, Xianxia could only think of a way to solve it. Fighting was not the only way to solve the problem. If it wasn't necessary, Xianxia wasn't willing to make enemies everywhere. Therefore he tried to communicate with Baihong, hoping to find another way to solve this problem from Baihong. Otherwise, Xianxia might really have to fight all the way from the Heavenly Gate to the Imperial Extreme Hall. Baihong understood the situation. When he learned of Xianxia's motives, he no longer tried to obstruct him. On the contrary, he hoped that Xianxia could smoothly obtain the soul mirror and thus resolve the illness plaguing Qin Ruiying, thereby forming a good relationship with Heaven Capital. Didn't Baihong resent Xianxia? Obviously it was impossible. However, he had no choice but to lower his head under the eaves. Churchill once said, "There are no eternal friends in this world, nor are there eternal enemies, only eternal interests." Since the two of them had reached a preliminary consensus, the next priority was, obviously he wanted to find Wuxia. But in this vast sea of people, where should he go to find her? For this reason, after a serious discussion between Xianxia and Baihong, they finally found a more reliable method. That was, Baihong appeared and used divine telekinesis to lure Wuxia out. It was equivalent to humans sending signals to space to search for aliens. Xianxia circled the world with Baihong, and Baihong continuously released divine telekinesis to lure Wuxia out. No matter what, the two of them were fellow disciples and had a close relationship. With Baihong as a guarantor, Wuxia should be able to boldly show up. This method had a certain degree of feasibility. Therefore, Baihong and Qing Wan temporarily broke away from their prisoner status and became Xianxia's friends. Naturally, he couldn't treat his friends too badly. Therefore, Xianxia brought Baihong and Qing Wan to Kongju district and temporarily settled them here. For safety reasons, Xianxia didn't remove the seal in Qing Wan's body. He only relieved her internal injuries and gave her the right to move freely. After that, Xianxia began to tour the world with Baihong overnight. Baihong's divine telekinesis range was limited, so she could only release it bit by bit. The whole process was like a salesperson sweeping the floor. She needed to go door to door to hand out business cards. This was a very long process. Xianxia roughly calculated the time. Even if he flew with Baihong, it would take at least 3 months for Bai Hong to use divine telekinesis to sweep the world. 3 months, so be it. It was much better than being at a loss for what to do. Therefore, for the next period of time, Xianxia still sent the little girl to and from school on time during the day and took care of her daily life. At night, after the little girl fell asleep, he would start to tour the world with Bai Hong. During this period, Bai Hong was very cooperative and didn't play any tricks the whole time. But Xianxia's mood was getting heavier and heavier day by day. Because Qin Ruoying had not woken up. Yingying's coma time was far beyond Xianxia's imagination. Her breathing didn't stop, and the vital essence in her body was still circulating on its own. Everything was normal, but she couldn't wake up and looked like a vegetable. Bai Hong had never seen such a situation. He didn't know much about the Siming Xianyu, so he could only persuade Xianxia not to worry too much. As long as they found the soul mirror, everything would naturally be solved. Both of them placed their hopes on Wuxia. But they didn't know, Bai Hong's divine telekinesis had already attracted the attention of Zhang Yan and the others. This kind of indiscriminate divine telekinesis coverage was definitely undetectable by ordinary people. But in the eyes of Zhang Yan and the others, this was equivalent to holding a loudspeaker and shouting at the entrance of a village all day long. "Wuxia, Wuxia, where are you? Come out, I have something to talk to you about." Because of this, Zhang Yan even pretended to call Xianxia to ask. Although they were allies, Xianxia was still wary of this old man, so he didn't tell him the truth. He only said that he wanted to find Wuxia to prevent future trouble. Zhang Yan naturally didn't believe Xianxia's excuse. Therefore, this old man continued to follow Xianxia for a long time and accurately guessed Xianxia's true purpose. For Zhang Yan, Xianxia was a great help in overturning Tiandu, so he naturally couldn't let this help become a hindrance. So Zhang Yan began to act. No one had ever noticed this mysterious organization. It was called the 9 Serenities. There were 9 heavens in the sky and 9 layers of earth. There was Tiandu above and the 9 Serenities below. Ever since the divine ancestor led the generals of Tiandu to ascend to the great world, the sinners left behind in the lower realm were full of hatred and formed this mysterious organization. Compared to Tiandu, its strength was too insignificant. After all, they could only watch the spiritual qi dry up and witness the arrival of the end of the world. They used to be high and mighty cultivators, but now they were like maggots in the gutter. Even becoming a diviner required a great opportunity. They could be as humble as dust, but they couldn't be as twisted as maggots. The resentment that had accumulated for thousands of years. It wasn't until the emergence of the first spiritual qi tide that they finally had the opportunity to release it. The generals of Tiandu didn't even know that there was such a reactionary organization in the lower realm. But the people of the 9 Serenities had already made an oath. They only lived to overturn Tiandu and avenge the suffering of thousands of years of repression. The 9 Serenities had begun to plan a long time ago. In addition to constantly sending people to Tiandu as spies, the rest of the people were silently waiting for the opportunity. For this reason, they would rather endure hundreds or even thousands of years of loneliness and torture, just to wait for the right time. Now the time had come and they only lacked the opportunity to blow the horn. Chapter 401. This was an era where there were no secrets. But the existence of the 9 Serenities had never been known to outsiders. After tens of thousands of years of dormancy and management, the power of the 9 Serenities had far exceeded everyone's imagination. They were like an invisible net, firmly grasping the entire earth in the palm of their hand. Whether it was the Wuxia or other countries, from the nobles to the lowly peddlers, no one could escape the control of the 9 Serenities. It was a very simple principle. Even the Rothschild family could exist for hundreds of years, let alone a super-large organization composed of immortal cultivators like the 9 Serenities. Zhuangzi once said, "Summer insects cannot speak of ice and children cannot speak of the sea." For immortal cultivators, fame and fortune in the eyes of mortals were meaningless. The only purpose of their existence was to one day completely overturn Tiandu and establish a new dynasty of their own, the 9 Serenities. As the spiritual energy of heaven and earth declined day by day, the celestial being almost became a threshold for cultivation. But the inheritance of the 9 Serenities was passed down generation after generation. They hid behind the scenes, providing unimaginable help to mortals, and indirectly controlling one dynasty after another in the world. Whether it was the Wuxia Empire in the east or the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, or the Macedonian Empire in the west, The 9 Serenities never interfered with the rise and fall of human dynasties, but they always put down their chess pieces when necessary. After all, compared to the high and mighty Tiandu, the 9 Serenities were too weak. They had to make use of all the resources available to them in order to fight a battle with Tiandu with a great disparity in strength. The winner could have everything. Just like when the Taiqing divine ancestor led everyone to the great world and enjoyed the entire great world alone. The sinners who stayed in the lower realm could only suffer the depletion of spiritual energy and watch their inheritance deteriorate with each generation. That feeling, just like how human civilization degenerated from the universal era to the primitive era. How could the primitive people who stayed on Earth not hold a great grudge against Tiandu? The 9 Serenities was a super large tribe formed by these primitive people. Although the divine ancestor had kindly left the divine gate and gave the descendants of the sinners a chance to ascend. However, the old man seemed to have not thought of a problem at all, and that was, if the descendants of these sinners were able to cultivate to the celestial realm in such simple conditions in the lower realm, then if they were born in the great world, how could their cultivation base stop at the celestial realm? Think about it from another perspective. I spent my entire life cultivating in the lower realm, and it took me 200 years to finally break through to the Deva realm. But when he came to Tiandu, he found that a young man in his 20s or 30s could easily become a celestial. How would the sinners of the lower bound who had cultivated their entire lives feel? That was how resentment was born. They could be as humble as dust, but they could not be as twisted as maggots. Such an unfair encounter had already distorted the mentality of the people of the 9 Serenities. Finally, the resentment that had accumulated in their hearts for tens of thousands of years was completely ignited with the appearance of the spirit energy tide. With the recovery of spirit qi, the human world will prosper. The 9 Serenities would never allow Tiandu to return to the lower realm, because the lower realm belonged to them. It was precisely because of this. At the same time that Xianxia led Baihong to search for Wuxia, the 9 Serenities led by Zhang Yan also began to move. They did not have a soul as powerful as Xianxia's, but they used a more effective method, which was face recognition. As long as there were cameras and internet coverage, there was no way to escape the detection of a supercomputer. Wuxia might not have thought that there would be so many people in the world looking for him. After this period of recuperation, his injuries had more or less healed. However, for safety reasons, Wuxia had never left the Arctic Circle. In addition to his daily cultivation and recuperation, this guy would lie on the iceberg, fishing and playing with polar bears. His days were quite comfortable. On this day, January 20th, it had been a full 3 months since they had escaped with the Wuxia blood escape. If compared to the time in Tiandu, it was equivalent to 24 months, which was 2 years. Everything was relative, including time. The flow of time in the great world was different from that in the lower realm. 1 year on Earth was 8 years in heaven. And this was the fundamental reason why the flow of time in the Guiyao Temple was 8 times slower than the outside world. The 5 temples were directly connected to Tiandu, so the flow of time in the temples was not Earth's time but Tiandu's time. Xianxia used the Guiyao Temple as a cultivation place before, but he did not figure out the key point. In addition, it was also because of the time difference between the 2 realms that divine generals of Tiandu were generally unwilling to come to the lower realm. Take Wuxia for example, he had only been in the lower realm for 3 months, but 2 years had passed in heaven. What did 2 years mean? Divine generals who were about the same cultivation level as Wuxia had probably surpassed him by now. Sailing against the current, one would fall behind if they did not advance. How could Wuxia not be depressed? Not only did Xianxia destroy the 5 temples, but he also King dispersed the spirit energy tide immediately. Without the support of the spirit energy tide, the divine gate could not be opened at all. He had a home but he could not go back. Therefore Wuxia was as depressed as he could be at this moment. When he thought about how he had wasted 2 years in the lower realm, Wuxia's mood became particularly bad. He was not in the mood to continue cultivating, so he got up and flew out, ready to stroll around and relax. For safety reasons, Wuxia did not fly too far but came to a human city closest to the North Pole, Longyern City. There was the northernmost bank in the world, the northernmost church in the world, and even a university in the northernmost part of the world. There were about 1,800 people in the town. Because of the polar night, the entire town would be in darkness from November to January every year, and there was not a trace of sunlight at all. The sky here was dark green and the cold wind was bone-chilling, but the houses were colorful. Because The 3-month-long night made this small town the most romantic place in the world. Wuxia soon arrived at Longyuan City. As soon as he walked into the town, he was deeply fascinated by the colorful houses and the colorful neon lights in front of him. Therefore, Wuxia walked directly into the bar with the most people almost without any hesitation. In terms of combat power, ordinary people were no different from ants in the eyes of immortal cultivators. But in terms of playfulness, 10,000 immortal cultivators might not be as good as one ordinary person. Maybe because he had been lonely for a long time, when Wuxia came to such a lively place, he could not help but be affected by the atmosphere in the bar. Therefore he did not even think about it and directly removed the breath concealment technique, then sat at the bar like an ordinary customer and drank leisurely. From beginning to end, he did not realize that the thing that kept flashing red on the bar was called Chapter 402. There was no day in Longjurali City, only 24 hours of night. This was a pure land located in the far north, the only city in the world where death was illegal. But today, this pure land was destined to be dyed red with blood. Under the long polar night, Longjurali City was filled with a romantic atmosphere. This was the best time for the town's bar business. The bar music was turned up to the maximum, almost deafening people's ears. Tourists from all over the world were affected by the atmosphere and started to dance crazily on the dance floor. The air was filled with the smell of hormones. A coldly dressed woman mixed in with the crowd of men laughing and joking. She used flirtatious words to tease the men who couldn't control themselves. When the man wanted to take a step further, the woman was like a slippery loach running to another target. The woman shuttled back and forth in the crowd. Suddenly, she saw the Asian man sitting by the bar. This man was very strange. He was only wearing a strange long robe and a thin layer of clothing. The woman guessed which country's traditional clothing was from, and her interest was piqued little by little. Since he was used to eating Western food, it would be a good experience to change his tastes once in a while. The woman treated this man as her prey tonight and sat directly next to him. There were no blondes in Tiandu. Therefore, Wuxia couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly when he sensed the woman approaching him. Interesting. Even though they didn't speak the same language, the woman's ambiguous aura floated into Wuxia's eyes. If it was in the past, Wuxia definitely wouldn't have any interest in this kind of ant-like existence. But today was different. He was here to relax. Therefore, Wuxia imitated the others and pulled the woman into his arms. The woman smiled proudly as if she was very satisfied with her charm. However, just as the woman was about to offer her red lips and have a beautiful encounter with this mysterious Asian man, Wuxia's figure mysteriously disappeared from her side. The woman was stunned for a few seconds before she let out a heart-wrenching scream. At the same time, Wuxia's figure suddenly appeared above the town. It was snowing heavily outside the house and the cold wind was bone-chilling. The visibility was less than 10 meters, but Wuxia's line of sight was firmly fixed on the southeast direction. There was an extremely powerful Jin Yuan fluctuation at that location, and Wuxia also sensed a trace of hostility from this wave. It was obvious that they were here for him. Seeing this, Wuxia did not cower. Instead, he flew towards that direction. This was a huge iceberg that had not melted for 10,000 years. It floated on the Arctic Ocean, moving slowly with the waves. Before Wuxia got close, he saw a man standing on the peak of the ice mountain with his hands behind his back. Because they had already fought before, the moment Wuxia saw Zhou Xian, he couldn't help but reveal a trace of surprise. This old thief, could it be that he was tired of living and came here to seek death? While thinking, Wuxia landed on the ice mountain. At this moment, Zhou Xian slowly turned around and smiled at him. Divine General Wuxia, I haven't seen you in a long time. I've missed you. When Wuxia heard this, a trace of disdain appeared on his face. He first looked around and after confirming that Xianxia was not nearby, he said coldly, I haven't even thought of looking for you and you're already in a hurry to die? Die. No. Zhou Xian shook his head and smiled. Divine General, you don't know this, but I cherish my life very much. It wasn't easy for me to live for 1,000 years, so how could I give up my life so easily? Wuxia did not immediately reply because he had already noticed that something was amiss. Zhou Yan's current state was completely different from last time. Just look at how confident he is. Even if Wuxia used his butt to think, he knew that if he did not have a certain amount of confidence, Zhou Yan would definitely not come all the way here to die. Wuxia was confident, but he was not arrogant. Last time, Wuxia was forced to use the blood escape technique by Xianxia, and he had already suffered a great loss. Therefore he would not allow himself to fail again. Fighting because of personal feelings was something that only children would do. Therefore when Wuxia saw how confident Zhang Yan was, he immediately wanted to retreat. At this moment, Wuxia was very similar to Sima Yi, who was scared off by Zhuge Liang's empty city strategy. Regardless of what Zhang Yan was planning, there was still a long way to go. This debt, he would slowly settle it in the future. After figuring this out, Wuxia didn't even say a single word. Instead, he turned into a streak of light and flew toward the horizon. However, at this moment, a golden barrier suddenly appeared in the air. This barrier was like a fishing net, directly trapping Wuxia in it. Then Zhang Yan's sinister laughter sounded again. Divine General Wuxia, where are you going? Yuanying was not easy to kill. This was something that all immortal cultivators knew. Unless one's cultivation level was suppressed, if the other party was determined to escape, it was actually very difficult to catch them. This was also the reason why Wuxia was able to escape from under Qianxi's nose. Wuxia had already escaped once. Zhang Yan knew that Wuxia had the blood escape secret technique, so he went back to the floating mist mountain to prepare. He brought the 9 serenities 10,000 years of savings with him just to win the first battle. Wuxia should not have come here. Because once he came he would not be able to leave. Wuxia's surprise gradually turned into shock when he saw more than 100 celestial beings from Daiyu Island slowly flying toward him. Among these celestial beings, there were more than 20 Yuanying. They were all at the divine general level. The rest were all above the diviner level. How was this possible? More than half of the Jiang family's 300 celestial beings were killed by him. It had only been 3 months since he last saw them. How could there be so many Yuanying? While Wuxia was still in a daze, the Jiang family's celestial beings had already surrounded him, just like last time on Daiyu Island. However, this time Wuxia's mood completely changed. No, how could there be so many Yuanying in the lower realm? Who exactly are you people? Perhaps because Wuxia knew that he could not escape, after taking out the Wuji apricot yellow flag and the white bone soul summoning banner, he locked his gaze on Zhang Yan and tried to get an answer from Zhang Yan. But unfortunately Zhang Yan seemed to know that villains usually died from talking too much. Thus he did not answer any of Wuxia's questions. Instead he nodded lightly at the celestial beings present. Formation. Yin Yang 6 Directions Formation. Activate. In an instant, the sky suddenly lit up and multicolored light filled the sky. Chapter 403. In order to overthrow Tiandu, the 9 serenities had been planning for tens of thousands of years. They had been waiting for the revival of spirit energy and the rise of the human world. Only then would this ferocious beast from the primordial times finally wake up from its deep slumber. Not everyone wanted to ascend to Tiandu. Those who had successfully broken through to the celestial realm but did not ascend became the most staunch supporters of the 9 serenities. Just like Zhang Yan, they chose to stay in the lower realm and continue to cultivate. If their lifespan ran out, they would voluntarily give up their physical bodies and let their souls enter the soul crystal in order to continue living. 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, generation after generation. Many people chose to give up because they could not stand the eternal loneliness. However, there were even more people who persevered. There were always sacrifices on the road to revolution. Countless people advanced dauntlessly, just to welcome the moment when they were truly needed. Tens of thousands of years passed and the world changed. Finally, the time had come. Zhang Yan was not the founder of the 9 serenities, but he was a core member. If Tiandu was compared to the Qin dynasty, then Zhang Yan was Xiang Yu, who raised the banner of righteousness high. The 300 celestials of the Jiang clan. They were the disciples of Jiang Dong under his command. Zhang Yan was indeed a ruthless person. If he was not ruthless, he would not have been able to sit on the throne of the 9 serenities. In order to achieve his lofty goal, Zhang Yan chose to sacrifice his own family, thus creating the 9 serenities. It was precisely because of this that the once glorious Jiang clan of Daiyu Island had now become the arsenal of the 9 serenities, providing the 9 serenities with excellent physical bodies. Although the blood of the Jiang clan still flowed in their bones, their souls had long been replaced by others. Of course, for Tiandu, a mere 20 or so yuanying was naturally nothing. What really frightened Wuxia was, Tiandu was unaware of this. For tens of thousands of years, people from the lower realm had constantly ascended to Tiandu. However, after these people ascended, what they saw was not the fairyland they had imagined. Instead, they saw all kinds of injustice. They were like black people who had been smuggled into Wuxia. No one would look them in the eye and no one would care what they were thinking. Those who are not of our race are bound to have different intentions. Ascenders were constantly discriminated against, ridiculed, and ostracized. No matter how high their cultivation base was, they were just lowly people from the lower realms. Tiandu had never cared about the lowly people of the lower realm. In order to show the spirit of universal love of the divine ancestor, Tiandu had always maintained contact with the 5 places of inheritance so that these sinners could ascend to Tiandu in the future. And this was also the fundamental reason why All Saints Valley was able to use the spirit-gathering formation to forcibly summon divine generals from Heaven Capital when Xianxia flattened them. Absolutely no one would have thought. The so-called 5 lands of heritage were actually branches of the 9 serenities, but this secret was only known to a few people. Everything was under the control of the 9 serenities, including Xianxia, the apple that accidentally fell on the chessboard. Since he was on the chessboard, he was a chess piece. It was just that this chess piece was much bigger than the others. From the moment Xianxia stepped into All Saints Valley, Jiang Yan had already known of Xianxia's existence. Although he was a variable, he was controllable. This was why Jiang Yan had displayed an almost abnormal enthusiasm for Xianxia when Xianxia first set foot on Daiyu Island. It was a pleasure to have a friend from afar. Jiang Yan was guiding Xianxia, trying to pull Xianxia to the opposite side of Tiandu. After all, the only advantage the 9 serenities had was probably information. The enemy was in the light while I was in the dark. Jiang Yan did not know why Xianxia was working so hard to find Wuxia. But he knew very well that Wuxia was not just a divine general. Wuxia, he was actually Yuhuan Tianzuan's only son. If they could successfully kill Wuxia, who would face Yuhuan Tianzuan's wrath? It would not be Jiang Yan, nor would it be the 9 serenities. It would be Xianxia, who had always been at the forefront. Wuxia's identity was not a secret. Almost everyone in the great world knew about it. This guy had been outstanding since he was young, but he was mischievous and disliked cultivation. Yuhuan Tianzuan could not do anything about him, so he handed him over to Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, hoping that Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells could guide this mischievous second generation back to the right path. But he did not teach his own son. The consequences were, after Wuxia grew up, he did not recognize him as his father. No matter the occasion, Wuxia would always call him Yuhuan Tianzuan, which almost angered him to death. In fact, from the respect Wuxia showed to Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, Wuxia was actually quite a sentimental person. The reason why he made Yuhuan Tianzuan angry was probably because he had a special father-son relationship with Yuhuan Tianzuan. Yuhuan Tianzuan probably knew this too. So even though he was usually cold to Wuxia, he was secretly very concerned about this son of his. Through Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spells, he indirectly gave Wuxia all kinds of Dharma treasures. This was a very strange father-son relationship. It seemed distant, but it was also very close. So, when Wuxia saw the Yin-Yang 6 directions array being activated again, a relieved smile suddenly appeared on his face. It was the same array formation, but the person who said it was completely different. Wuxia held the flag in his hand, already understanding what he was about to face. So before Jiang Yan made a move, Wuxia suddenly raised his head and let out a long howl. Yuhuan Tianzuan, oh Yuhuan Tianzuan, this time I'm really going to fall. Although you can't hear me, but I'll call you again, father. Speaking of this, Wuxia's expression suddenly froze. Immediately after, he did not forget to ridicule himself. As expected, I'm not used to it after not calling you for a long time. Yuhuan Tianzuan, did you hear that? Your son is being bullied. Remember to avenge him. Father. Wuxia did not say the last word out loud. Instead, he silently repeated it in his heart. Then he raised the Wuji apricot yellow flag high up, and like the only remaining flag bearer on the battlefield, he charged towards the 9 underworlds led by Jiang Yan alone. Even if the entire army was killed, the flag-bearer could not fall. If he fell, it would be a true annihilation. Jiang Yan looked at Wuxia coldly. Even though Wuxia was surrounded, Jiang Yan did not let his guard down at all. Instead, he decisively ordered everyone to attack at the same time, not giving Wuxia any chance of survival. In an instant, a bloody light lit up the sky. From afar, it was as beautiful as the sunset. In the end, this piece of pure land in the extreme north was dyed red with blood. Not long after the battle began, Qin Shi, who was patrolling the South Pacific Ocean, suddenly sensed something and looked towards the north. Bai Hong was confused, so she asked curiously, "What's wrong?" "Something's wrong." After that, Qin Shi didn't wait for Bai Hong to respond. Chapter 404. 9 underworlds came out in full force and set up an inescapable net just to kill Wuxia. Wuxia was only a Yuanying cultivator. Even with all his treasures, there was no way he could defend against 20 Yuanying cultivators and countless golden core cultivators. Although Wuxia knew that he had no chance of winning, he did not lose his fighting spirit. Instead, he exploded with a fighting spirit that was far stronger than before. This was the most serious battle he had ever fought in his life. Even a trapped beast would put up a fight, let alone a human. He was a divine general of Tiandu and the only son of Yuhuan Tianzuan. He represented Tiandu, so even though he knew that he would die, he had to die with dignity. Therefore Wuxia decided to burn his Yuanying. He did not want to run anymore. The scenery at the North Pole was not bad. It would be one of the happiest things in his life to be able to sleep here. After Wuxia let out a long roar, his body began to burn like firewood. At that moment, blood dyed the sky red. The sound of spells exploding could be heard continuously. It was as if the spell was playing a requiem for this arrogant and slightly neurotic man. The burning of Yuanying would not last for long. Therefore the battle quickly came to an end. This was a battle that seemed short but was actually extremely tragic. Wuxia thought that killing one was enough and killing two was worth it. When he was about to die, he actually used a secret technique to detonate the yellow flag and white bone soul summoning flag in his hands. The 2 9th-grade spirit treasures exploded at the same time, destroying the souls of the 3 Yuanying stage cultivators closest to him on the spot. At the same time, the Yin and Yang 6 directions formation was successfully shattered, causing the spiritual energy to dissipate, which successfully attracted Qin Shi's attention. As for Wuxia himself, of course he was also turned into a wisp of smoke in the explosion. From now on, there would be no more divine general named Wuxia in this world. Reporting to Yuzun, Wuxia's Sumeru mustard seed bag has been found. The formation imprint has been destroyed according to your orders. Please give us the order. Very good, let's retreat. It's time for our old friend to take the stage. The 9 Serenities had lost 3 Yuanying in this battle, but Jiang Yan did not seem to feel the slightest bit of heartache. Instead, he calmly ordered his men to clean up the battlefield as quickly as possible. He knew that Qin Shi would come, so he had to hide everything before Qin Shi arrived. Otherwise, where would he find such a good scapegoat? After receiving Jiang Yan's order, the generals of the 9 Serenities did not even bother to clean up the battlefield. They quietly retreated like a receding tide, leaving behind only the messy aftermath of the battle. Qin Shi rushed to the Arctic Circle as fast as he could. His intuition told him that this true essence fluctuation was not simple. But unfortunately, Qin Shi was like the police in the movies. He was always the last to arrive. By the time he arrived at the scene of the incident with Bai Hong, everything had disappeared. All that was left was a shattered ice field that seemed to have experienced a carpet bombing. Some broken spell imprints were vaguely left in the air. Qin Shi silently sensed them. He felt that these spells were familiar, but he could not tell where he had seen them before. It was very strange. It was a bit like the Jiang family's True 6 Trigram spell, but it was much more exquisite. It was far beyond the level of the Jiang family. Qin Shi knew the ins and outs of Daiyu Island very well, so he did not even think about Jiang Yan. Therefore he could not even figure out what had happened here. Who was fighting? What level of battle was it? Judging from the true essence fluctuation that he had sensed earlier, the level of this battle was far beyond Qin Shi's imagination. The Battle of the Yuanying? When did Earth become so terrifying? Qin Shi silently sensed the spell imprints in the air, trying to find some clues from them. Bai Hong, on the other hand, began a carpet search in the snow. Finally, under a pile of soft snow, Bai Hong successfully found a tattered piece of cloth about the size of a fingernail. This rag was yellow with golden threads embroidered on it. It was obviously not an ordinary item. Bai Hong picked up the tattered piece of cloth and carefully rubbed it in her hand. Immediately after, he seemed to have suddenly thought of something, and even his pupils couldn't help but dilate a lot. This is the Wuji apricot yellow flag? Bai Hong did not dare to believe his guess. He tried to sense some spiritual energy from it, but this rag was no different from an ordinary tablecloth. Other than the brighter color, there was nothing special about it. Under normal circumstances, magic treasures could be recycled and reused. For example, Xianxia had recycled Qing Wan's spear. But if this magic treasure was a natal magic treasure, and its owner used a secret technique to detonate it, this magic treasure would be completely destroyed. Even if it was picked up, it would take up too much space. In an instant, Bai Hong's mind went blank. After staring blankly for a long while, he began to search in the snow as if he had gone mad. Xianxia noticed his abnormal behavior, so he stopped what he was doing and used his divine sense to help Bai Hong search. This search was incredible. After Xianxia picked up a palm-sized rag from the snow, Bai Hong was stunned. "It's Wuxia, it's really him." Hearing this, even Xianxia couldn't help but be stunned. Wuxia. This guy was covered with high-level magic treasures to defend himself, and he had the blood escape technique to save his life. Even he was not 100% sure that he could kill Wuxia. Who on earth could do it? At the same time, the great world, Tiandu. Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan was currently standing in a pavilion filled with candlelight. Next to each candle was a small wooden tablet with different names written on it. It looked like a memorial tablet in the ancestral hall. Yuhuan Tianzuan picked up one of the wooden tablets with trembling hands. The wooden tablet had the words Wuxia written on it. He seemed to be a little unable to believe what he saw. So after picking up the wooden tablet and carefully touching it, Yuhuan Tianzuan picked up the candle next to it. The other candles were still burning well, but this one was extinguished. "Wuxia, my son, can you tell father, what did you encounter in the lower realm?" This was the heart fire lamp. Every day when a newborn was born, the heart fire would be used as a lamp. The heart fire lamp could not be extinguished. Once it was extinguished, it meant that the owner of the lamp was dead. And this was the so-called, when the person died, the lamp went out. Although Yuhuan Tianzuan was the supreme of Tiandu, after seeing Wuxia's heart fire lamp go out, he couldn't help but shed 2 lines of hot tears. But a celestial lord was a celestial lord after all. Even if the grief in his heart was extreme, he had to wait until this grief subsided before he stepped out of the attic again. "Pass down my orders. Order the 5 divine generals to return immediately and take the heaven-bearing efficacious floating mirror. Build the soul bridge, open the gate of heaven." Chapter 405. Following the extinguishment of the heart flame lamp, Yuhuan Tianzuan, in a fit of rage, officially put the opening of the divine gate on the agenda. For a moment, the great world was in a state of panic and trepidation. Under the influence of the 9 underworlds, the seemingly tranquil earth gradually became turbulent and unpredictable, with undercurrents surging. Xianxia had always wanted to stay out of this, but he did not know that he had already become a chess piece in Zhang Yan's hands. He and Bai Hong searched the Arctic tundra for a long time before they finally had to believe Wuxia was most likely dead. Otherwise, how could they explain the destruction of the Wuji apricot yellow flag? If it wasn't a last resort, no one would detonate their life source magic weapon. This was a 9th-grade spiritual treasure. Once combined with the other 4 flags, it could form a treasure comparable to the Tianyan sword. Therefore, Xianxia really could not understand who on earth could have forced Wuxia to such a state. If even Xianxia could not figure it out, Bai Hong naturally could not figure it out either. Chongli's death at Xianxi's hands was pardonable. After all, the 3 of them together were no match for Xianxia, not to mention Chongli alone. During this period of time, Xianxia had been with Bai Hong, so Wuxia's murderer was definitely not Xianxia. But then who could it be? Other than the heavenly venerate, Bai Hong really could not think of anyone else who had such ability. When did the lower realm become so dangerous? Xianxia and Bai Hong had the same question in their hearts. But the most important question was not this question, but now that Wuxia was dead, where should they go to find the soul mirror? Xianxia had no choice but to bring Bai Hong back to Shangjing and let him see Qin Ruiying, who was still in a coma. Qin Ruiying had been in a coma for more than half a month. During this time she had not woken up. Her pulse and breathing were still normal, so she looked like a vegetable. Xianxia could not accept this result. Neither could Nian. Therefore Xianxia clearly told Bai Hong, if Yingying did not wake up, then he could only bring Bai Hong to the divine gate personally. Bai Hong followed Xianxia to the kindergarten to sneak a peek at the cute little fellow and completely believed Xianxi's words. But unfortunately, Bai Hong was just an ordinary divine general, so his knowledge was limited. Therefore, after seeing Qin Ruing's condition, he could only frown and analyze. After Chongli went missing, Yuhuan Tianzuan gave the soul mirror to Master so that he could send people to the lower realm at any time. Master loved, of Wushu Master's Master. Fong of Wushu of Heaven, of Wushu of Heaven, of the Divine of Heaven, of Wus of Heaven. Speaking of this, Bai Hong suddenly stopped and then put on a thoughtful expression. At this point, Bai Hong already knew that Qin Shi had fought with Wushu and forced him to use the blood escape technique. Therefore, after thinking for a while, he continued, I didn't know that Wushu had already descended. Since you forced Wushu to use the blood escape technique, he must have been severely injured. Wushu couldn't force open the divine gate on his own, so he stayed in the lower realm to recuperate. And you just said that your wife has been unconscious for half a month. If that's the case, the soul mirror can't be in Wushu's hands. He must have left the soul mirror in divine capital before he descended. Hearing this, Qin Shi was stunned. Wasn't this King nonsense? After going in such a big circle, he still had to enter the divine gate to solve the problem? Qin Shi's patience had run out. So without saying a word, he pulled Bai Hong and flew directly to the sky above Shangjing City. Opening the divine gate required a spirit energy tide, right? There was no spirit energy tide now, right? At most, he could artificially create a spirit energy tide. Qin Shi had already thought it through. He was not going to divine capital to fight but to reason with them. As long as he could solve Yingying's illness, he didn't even mind becoming friends with divine capital. A soul formation stage cultivator had taken the initiative to express his goodwill. Presumably, any faction with a brain wouldn't refuse. Bai Hong was shocked by Qin Shi's courage. He was imprisoned by Qin Shi for more than half a year, and he dreamed of returning to divine capital. Seeing that Qin Shi took the initiative to take him back, Bai Hong was naturally happy, so he wanted Qin Shi to bring Qing Wan and Shui Xiang along. As long as the three of them could return to divine capital safely, Bai Hong promised to let bygones be bygones. He was also willing to recommend Qin Shi so that Qin Shi could smoothly obtain the soul mirror. After all, Qin Shi just wanted to borrow the soul mirror, not occupy it permanently, so the heavenly venerables wouldn't be so stingy. The two reached a consensus. Then Qin Shi used himself as the eye of the formation and the entire Shangjing City as the formation pattern to forcibly set off a huge spirit energy storm in the sky. A steady stream of spirit energy rushed to the center of the storm. In less than a while, this storm evolved into a turbulent tide of spiritual energy. Taking advantage of the gap between Qin Shi's maintenance of the tide, Bai Hong hid at the side and frantically grasped the spirit energy of heaven and earth. Under the nourishment of the spirit energy, Bai Hong's skin gradually became white and rosy, so much so that he looked much younger. Qin Shi used his own vital essence to gather the tide. This action was like reaching into a water tank and stirring it, forming a waterspout in the water. The whole process didn't require too much effort, so Qin Shi could persist for a long time. But he didn't know the reason. Qin Shi maintained it from noon to afternoon. The tide was getting bigger and bigger, but the divine gate still didn't open. Now that Nian was about to finish school, Qin Shi hesitated again and finally had to temporarily withdraw his vital essence. Then he turned to look at Bai Hong and asked, "What's the situation? Why hasn't the divine gate opened?" Hearing this, Bai Hong also looked around in confusion. It didn't make sense. Wushu's life and death were unknown. Didn't Yuhuan Tianzuan send someone down to check the situation? There were two conditions to open the divine gate. One was the appearance of a powerful spirit energy tide in the lower realm, and the other was the heavenly effecate floating mirror. Under normal circumstances, once a spirit energy tide appeared in the lower realm, Tiandu would use the heavenly effecate floating mirror to open the divine gate so that sinners in the lower realm could ascend. Of course, Tiandu would also occasionally send divine generals down to the lower realm to carry out various missions, such as Bai Hong and Wushu. Wushu's identity was extraordinary. How could Yuhuan Tianzuan as his father not be worried at all? I don't know. Maybe something happened up there? Why don't we try again tomorrow? Qin Shi was speechless. After glaring fiercely at Bai Hong, he flew back to Shangjing City without a word. Seeing this, Bai Hong hurriedly chased after him and asked, "Hey, where are you going?" "To pick up my child from school." "Why didn't the divine gate open?" "That was because Tiandu was using the soul mirror as the core to prepare to build a soul bridge." Wuxia's unexpected death made Yuhuan Tianzuan, who had been hesitating, finally make up his mind. Because of this, the heavenly venerables also reached a consensus. So when the soul bridge was completed. Chapter 406. January 26th. The little girl who had been in kindergarten for a semester finally welcomed the first winter break in her life. Before the break, the teacher held a class meeting to remind the parents of the things to pay attention to during the break. At the same time, she gave the children a winter break homework. The winter break homework of the kindergarten was naturally not as exaggerated as that of the middle school. At most, it was only 2 or 3 pages. The content was mainly to write numbers from memory, review pinyin, memorize nursery rhymes, and so on. She only hoped that the children would not forget all the things the teacher taught after the winter break. Goodbye, teacher. I'll miss you. Yin, good girl. I'll wait for you at school. See you next semester. Goodbye. The little girl nodded her little head like she was pounding garlic. After waving goodbye to the teacher reluctantly, she turned her head to look at the 2 brothers. Now that the 2 brothers were sent to and from school by Xianxia, they naturally could not go to school with her every day. Now that the winter break was finally here, the 3 children agreed to meet at the tea house tomorrow and then go to the ice rink to play. Wenwen Mingming, see you tomorrow. The little girl held Xianxi's hand and waited very politely until Xianxia's car started. Then she turned around and followed Xianxi home. The closer it was to the end of the year, the more deserted Shangjing City seemed. Every time the little girl breathed, she would exhale a stream of hot air. She thought it was very fun, so from time to time she would raise her little head and then imitate the dubbing in the short video. She would pout her mouth and shout a Chunibu line, "The evil dragon roars, a woo a woo." The little girl was like a cute little sun. Even in this cold winter she could still bring some warmth to Xianxi. The father and daughter held hands and walked slowly on the street. Before Xianxi could find a topic to talk about, the little girl asked first as usual, "Daddy, is mommy better today?" "She's better. She just got up and steamed some soup dumplings for you. When you get home it'll be ready." Xianxi gently squeezed the little girl's little hand and a bright smile appeared on his face. The little girl did not have any doubts about this. This was because the food her mother made tasted obviously different from the food her father made. He could tell. When it came to eating, the little thing was obviously a little greedy, so it shook Xianxi's arm and laughed. "Mommy's soup dumplings are also very delicious. I can eat 3. "Really? Daddy will bring you 3 in a while. You have to finish them all." "No problem." Xianxi carefully coaxed the little fellow. He didn't want Nian to know that Qin Ruiying had been sick in bed, so he deliberately cooked ordinary food from time to time to deceive the little girl and tell her that it was her mother who cooked it. At first the little fellow was naturally convinced. But after a long time the little fellow still felt a little strange. Since her mother could wake up to cook for her, why couldn't she wait until school was over before going to bed? The little guy blinked his big eyes and suddenly realized, "I haven't talked to my mother for a long time." Every time she came home her mother was sleeping, so she could only watch TV silently. She didn't dare to run around the room because she was afraid of disturbing her mother. Ever since her mother fell ill, the house had become a lot more deserted. It was just that the little fellow was still young, so she didn't understand the true meaning of the word deserted. "Daddy, when will mommy get better?" "Soon. The doctor said that mommy doesn't have any major problems. She just needs to rest for a period of time to recover." Similar conversations kept repeating. The little fellow was distressed because of her mother's illness. How could Xianxi not be distressed? He would set off a spirit energy tide in the sky above Shangjing City every day, but he had never seen the divine gate open. Therefore Xianxi's heart tightened. He just wanted to go to Tiandu to seek a soul mirror to cure Qin Ruiying's illness. Why did the divine gate refuse to open? Did he have to wait for the spirit energy tide to appear naturally? Xianxi was very distressed. But this kind of distress couldn't be shown in front of the little fellow. Therefore he felt as if his heart was being pressed under a big rock and he almost couldn't breathe. When would these days come to an end? Xianxi talked to the little fellow as he secretly pondered. The father and daughter soon returned home. As soon as she entered the door, the little fellow saw Bai Hong walking back and forth in the courtyard, so she took the initiative to wave at him and smiled. "Uncle Bai. Good afternoon. I'm out of school." Hearing this, Bai Hong seemed to have something on her mind. After forcing a smile at the little fellow, she looked at Xianxi with a face full of apprehension. For the sake of convenience, Xianxia left Bai Hong in the courtyard for this period of time. With the restriction guarding, he wasn't afraid of Bai Hong stirring up any storms. After all, this guy had just burned his yuanying and was almost a cripple now. Xianxia and Bai Hong looked at each other, but found that Bai Hong's expression was very strange today. It seemed like he was afraid of something. Why would Bai Hong be afraid? This guy didn't even care about his life. Why would he be afraid? Thinking of this, Xianxia asked with a puzzled face, "What's wrong with you?" However, after hearing Xianxia's question, Bai Hong seemed to be agitated and couldn't help but tremble. Then he pointed to the west wing with a panicked face. West wing. Xianxia was stunned. Immediately he understood what Bai Hong was afraid of. Then Xianxia's figure suddenly disappeared from the little fellow's side. When he appeared again, he was already at Qin Ruiying's bedside. In the room, Qin Ruiying was still lying quietly on the bed. Xianxia came to her side and wanted to reach out and touch his lover's cheek, but at this moment, his hands suddenly began to tremble uncontrollably. The moment his fingers touched Yingying's cheek, Xianxia froze. At this moment, time seemed to have frozen. Xianxia's consciousness was rapidly pulled away, as if his soul had left his body. Even though his lover was close at hand, he felt that he was getting further and further away from Yingying. Finally, Xianxia's trembling fingertips touched Qin Ruiying's cheek. But where he touched, it was ice cold. In fact, how sensitive were Xianxia's 5 senses? From the moment he stepped into the room, he realized that Qin Ruiying's breathing had stopped. This news came too suddenly, like a bolt from the blue, and instantly stunned Xianxia. Yingying had stopped breathing? How could it be? He just went to pick up Nian from school. How long had he been delayed? What exactly happened? Bai Hong, tell me. Chapter 407. What the hell was going on? Xianxia's mind went blank, leaving only this question echoing in his heart. No pulse, no breathing, no heartbeat. Even the blood had stopped flowing. In medical terms, death in the absolute sense meant that there was no heartbeat and the brain was dead. At this moment, Qin Ruiying completely fit this description. So in terms of scientific theory, she was already dead. And this was what Xianxia couldn't figure out at all. It wasn't an exaggeration to say, even if the entire human race died, Qin Ruiying couldn't die. Not to mention that Qin Ruiying's cultivation had already reached the diviner level, and she was immune to all kinds of poisons. Moreover, she had Xianxia, a high-level immortal cultivator, by her side to take care of her. Her heartbeat had stopped, right? Then let the heart beat again. Her blood had stopped flowing? Then let the blood flow again. Xianxia tried to use his true essence to forcefully awaken Qin Ruiying's body. This method was indeed effective. Qin Ruiying's heart began to beat slowly, and her breathing gradually stabilized. But once Xianxia withdrew his true essence, Qin Ruiying's body immediately stopped functioning like a machine that had lost power. Everything was because her soul had dissipated. Qin Ruiying didn't condense a golden core and she didn't have yuanying. The dissipation of her soul meant that she was completely dead, and even a golden immortal wouldn't be able to save her. Yingying died just like that? Xianxia stared blankly at his lover's face. In a trance. He actually remembered the bits and pieces of their past. Since Zhonghai University, the two of them had known each other and loved each other. Although they didn't verbally promise to grow old together, they both hid that promise deep in their hearts. Please take care of me for the rest of my life. Except for Xianxia's sudden disappearance for 5 years, the two of them hadn't experienced many storms in their relationship. Xianxia returned from the heavenly jade realm after a long and arduous journey. What welcomed him was the precious baby that Yingying had left behind for him. Qianyan. My name is Qianyan. You can call me Nian. Qianyan. He was filled with longing. Later on, Xianxia took Nian to look for Qin Ruiying all over the world. When the two met again after 500 years, Yingying directly gave him a slap in the face. At the same time, she also said her wish. May you leave for half your life and return as a young man. How could there be no twists and turns in life? However, from the moment the family of 3 reunited, all the hardships Xianxia had experienced had turned into dust swept into the garbage heap by him. Xianxia had no attachment to the past because the future was right beside him. Undying love was not something that could be proven by martyrdom. A heart full of love was not something that could only be heard when it was always on the tip of the tongue. The highest level of love. Actually, it was just that old saying, holding your hand growing old with you. That was all. If you win, I am willing to accompany you to rule the world. If you lose, I am willing to accompany you to make a comeback. When I rule the world, I will spread 10 miles of red dowry. I am willing to use 10 miles of red dowry as a gift, and I am willing to use the world as a betrothal gift. Are you willing to rule the world and spend the rest of your life with me? Xianxia did not strive for the world, so Yingying accompanied him in a small tea house by Hohai. When she had nothing to do, she would flip through books, take care of the children, and watch the flowers bloom and wilt in front of the courtyard with her lover. She would gaze at the clouds in the sky. Was there anything more blissful in the world than this? Xianxia could answer with absolute certainty, absolutely not. But now, his happy life had completely turned into bubbles. Thinking of this, Xianxia could not help but suddenly wake up from his memories. Only then did he realize that his face was already covered in tears. He gently lowered his head and left a kiss on Qin Ruiying's lips. Only then did he hold his lover's hand and solemnly promise, "Yingying, wait for me." There was no need to say more with just these 4 words. Even if I can't reincarnate in this life, I will still create havoc in the underworld and strike your name from the book of life and death. The little fellow stood in the courtyard with a blank face. Where did Daddy run off to? She looked around and did not see Xianxia's figure. Carrying her small bag, she eagerly ran towards the west wing. But just as she was about to step on the stairs, an earth-shattering roar resounded through the sky. Bai Hong! Tell me, what is going on? The little fellow was startled by this thunderous roar and almost fell to the ground. If it were not for the big cat's quick-wittedness and supported her from behind, this little fellow would probably have fallen to the ground and rolled several times. The little fellow was still in a state of shock. Before she could regain her senses, she suddenly felt a strong gust of wind blowing from behind. The cold wind burrowed into the little fellow's back and immediately made her shiver. She hurriedly looked back and found that Uncle Bai, who was still in a daze in the courtyard just now, was nowhere to be seen. The little fellow was frightened by this strange atmosphere and carried the big cat directly into the west wing. At the same time, she did not forget to shout, "Daddy? Daddy? Where are you?" "Daddy is in the sky." Because the little fellow was in the courtyard just now, Xianxia was furious and directly grabbed Bai Hong's neck and lifted him into the sky. Cough, cough, cough. I don't know either. Everything was fine just now, but suddenly there was no breath, Bai Hong struggled to reply. This time he was really sitting at home, but the trouble came from the sky. Bai Hong was, after all, a divine general. Although his cultivation was not even a tenth of it, his 5 senses were still very sharp. Just now he was meditating in the room to heal his wounds when he suddenly discovered that there was no breath in the west wing. He wanted to go in to check on the situation, but was blocked by the restrictions set up by Xianxia, so he could only wait in the courtyard for Xianxia to return. It was fine if Xianxia did not come back. But this time, he had almost lost his life. In reality, Xianxia also knew that this matter had nothing to do with Bai Hong. He even guessed that this definitely had something to do with the spirit mirror. Otherwise, who in this world would be able to cause Yingying's soul to scatter without a sound? I'll tell you. If anything happens to Yingying, I'll definitely bury your Tiandu with her. Xianxia was like an enraged lion, roaring at Bai Hong. Without waiting for Bai Hong to explain, he directly dragged Bai Hong and flew toward the Pacific Ocean. Although Bai Hong was not afraid of death, Qin Ruiying's current situation clearly had something to do with Tiandu, so he more or less felt that he could not face Xianxia. So Bai Hong obediently kept his mouth shut, waiting to see what Xianxia wanted to do next. Xianxia was angry, but he did not lose his mind because of it. Since Yingying's soul had dissipated, the most important thing now was not to directly find her soul, but to find a way to protect Yingying's physical body. Xianxia could not stay by Qin Ruiying's side at all times to help her maintain her physical body, so he urgently needed a magic treasure now, and that was Xianxia's blue wave silk gauze. Therefore, after arriving at the deep-sea cave, Xianxia frantically poured his vital essence into the large ice block that sealed Xiang. As long as Xiang's injuries were slightly relieved, her frozen state would naturally be lifted. Under Xianxia's continuous pouring of vital essence, the ice block gradually melted and Xiang suddenly fell from it. During this period of time, Xiang had been in a state of suspended animation, so she did not know what happened outside. Therefore, the moment she woke up, she directly launched an attack at Xianxia. Xiang, stop. Seeing this, Bai Hong hurriedly shouted to stop. But Xianxi's action was much faster than his voice. Zhou Xian did not even use the first move, and Xianxia had already inserted countless spirit needles into her body. Zhou Xian's almond-shaped eyes widened, and after glaring at Xianxia fiercely, her body completely softened. At this time, Bai Hong on the side let out a long sigh of relief. He was not afraid of death, but he was very afraid of his junior brothers and sisters dying for no reason. Fortunately, Xianxia did not intend to take her life. Take her, let's go. Xianxia grabbed the blue wave silk gauze, left a sentence coldly and turned to walk out of the cave. Hearing this, Bai Hong hurriedly helped Zhou Xian up from the ground, and then followed Xianxi's pace. Looking at the man in front of him who was silent on the surface, but his heart was filled with indignation. Bai Hong knew. Chapter 408. After leaving the cave in the deep sea, Xianxia did not rush back to Shangjing immediately. Instead he flew to Daiyu Island. He had no choice. After all, Bai Hong did not know anything about it. Furthermore, the divine gate had not opened for a long time. Even if Xianxia wanted to go to Heaven Capital, there was no way in. Therefore he could only pin his hopes on Jiang Yan. He wanted to see if he could find a better solution from Jiang Yan. Therefore Xianxia led Bai Hong and Zhou Xian straight to Daiyu Island. As soon as they got close to Daiyu Island, Xianxia suddenly realized that Daiyu Island's mountain guarding formation had become stronger. Previously, this heavenly dipper array was simply dispensable. Even Wuxia could easily break it, let alone him. After not being here for a while, this formation had been strengthened by 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. Even if Xianxia wanted to break the formation, he would have to spend a long time outside. Seeing this, Xianxia suddenly had a guess in her heart. Jiang Yan was probably afraid of Wuxia. That was why he strengthened the mountain guarding formation to prevent the same tragedy from happening again. Out of politeness, Xianxia did not choose to break the formation by force. Instead he waited patiently outside. He did not have to wait for long before the formation slowly opened. Ha, Mr. Qin, how have you been? I wonder why you've come all the way to Daiyu Island today. Before Jiang Yan even arrived, the enthusiastic greeting rang through the air above Daiyu Island. Hearing this, Xianxia smiled and replied, I'm sorry for coming uninvited. No, I haven't seen you for a few days. I really miss your elegance. Please follow me into the house for a chat, Mr. Qin. A white light flashed and Jiang Yan appeared in front of Xianxia. Seeing his warm and welcoming face, Xianxia smiled and greeted him politely. At this time, Jiang Yan's gaze landed on Bai Hong and Zhou Xian. Who are these two? Xianxia knew that Jiang Yan had a grudge against Tiandu, so he deliberately concealed it. They're my friends. They came with me to visit Daiyu Island. Oh, so that's how it is. Please come in. Jiang Yan laughed and made an inviting gesture to the 3 of them, then he took the lead to fly to Serene Afterglow Peak. Xianxia thought that he had deceived Jiang Yan, but he did not know that Jiang Yan had already known everything about Tiandu. With just a glance he had already determined the identities of Bai Hong and Zhou Xian. However, with this old fox's shrewdness, how could he be easily seen through by Xianxia when he was caught off guard? Therefore the old man pretended that he didn't see anything and led the way. Xianxia followed behind Jiang Yan. In the process of flying to Serene Afterglow Peak, he suddenly realized that the atmosphere of Daiyu Island was very different from before. Previously, Daiyu Island was like a paradise. The Jiang clan lived a simple life where they worked at sunrise and rested at sunset. If they wanted to cultivate, the clan would provide cultivation methods. If they were not interested in cultivation, the clan would not force them. After all, this was a large clan with a population of tens of thousands. The clan leader could not possibly require everyone to cultivate. But now, Daiyu Island was like a frontline military camp. From the elderly in their 70s to the children of 4 or 5 years old, all of them were cultivating hard on the drill ground. Jiang Yan noticed Xianxi's gaze, so he took the initiative to explain. The previous battle caused the Jiang clan to suffer heavy losses. The Jiang clan originally wanted to stand aloof from worldly affairs, but Tiandu was so aggressive. How can any egg remain intact when the nest is overturned? The clan members' fighting spirit has been aroused because of this. Speaking of which, it can be considered a good thing. Hearing this, Xianxia nodded. He did not think too much about it. He was even considering whether to inform Jiang Yan of the news of Wuxia's death. In fact, one could not blame Xianxia for being fooled by Jiang Yan. After all, he could not read minds. Jiang Yan didn't show the slightest bit of hostility towards Qin Shi, not even a little bit. Jiang Yan kept showing goodwill to Qin Shi from his words to his actions. For example, the Adumber flower. If not for Jiang Yan's free supply, Qin Ruiying would not have been able to ascend to the diviner level. In the end, Qin Shi still owed Jiang Yan a favor. Jiang Yan led Qin Shi to the Jiang clan's ancestral hall. This place was where the ancestors were worshipped. At the same time, it was also where the Jiang clan received important guests. Previously, Jiang Yuankue was in charge of the ancestral hall. Now that Jiang Yan had come out of seclusion, Jiang Yuankue naturally stepped down as the clan leader. Qin Shi looked around and realized that there was no one around the ancestral hall. He did not know if it was an illusion. Qin Shi felt that the atmosphere on Daiyu Island was a little strange. However, he could not pinpoint exactly what was strange about it. After all, in order to prevent Qin Shi from sensing that something was amiss, the possessed Jiang clan members had all retreated to the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Only Jiang Yan was left to receive him. Seeing that Qin Shi was constantly looking around, Jiang Yan did not wait for him to speak. He directly asked, "Mr. Qin, you came to the island this time because of the arbiter of fate Xian Nu, right?" As soon as he said that, Qin Shi's attention was immediately drawn back. He quickly asked, "Sir, do you know something? Actually, long before you came to the island, I already predicted that you would come to Daiyu Island today." At this point, Jiang Yan deliberately paused. Then he sighed and said, "The arbiter of fate Xian Nu is truly pitiful. Actually, I already received the news just now. Not only your wife but also the other arbiter of fate Xian Nu who are still alive. Even the arbiter of fate Xian Nu who is over 30 years old and has already stepped down. At the same time their souls have been scattered." As soon as he finished speaking, Jiang Yan stole a glance at Qin Shi. However, he saw that Qin Shi's face was terrifyingly gloomy. It was as if water was about to drip out of it. Seeing that, Jiang Yan could not help but feel secretly happy. Seeing that Qin Shi did not seem to understand the reason behind this, Jiang Yan pretended to sigh deeply. Then he turned around and walked to the back of the ancestral hall. He took out an ancient book. This is the record of the divine gate that the Jiang family's ancestors wrote. Originally, it was not supposed to be read by an outsider. However, this concerns your wife, so I'll make an exception this time. Sir, please read it yourself. Jiang Yan directly handed the ancient book to Qin Shi. After that, Qin Shi began to read 10 lines at a time. The first half of the ancient book was about how the Jiang family became a sinner. Qin Shi was not interested in this at all, so he directly flipped to the back. When it came to the Taiqing sacred ancestor, he began to read word by word seriously. As for the origin of the divine gate, Qin Shi had already learned more or less from Jiang Yan and Bai Hong. The ancient book only made further additions. However, these were not important. There was only one important thing in Qin Shi's eyes, and that was the arbiter of fate Xian Nu. The reason why the Jiang family did not have the arbiter of fate Xian Nu was actually because of this ancient book. Perhaps it was because the Jiang family's ancestors and the Taiqing sacred ancestor were enemies, so the ancient book unceremoniously pointed out that the arbiter of fate Xian Nu was a backup plan left by the Taiqing sacred ancestor for Tiandu. Back then, the sacred ancestor sacrificed Xian Nu's soul to lead the ancient immortal cultivators to the Great World. However, the Great World was only a small plane, far inferior to the large plane that Earth itself was in. Therefore, the sacred ancestor promised, as long as the descendants of sinners reached the celestial realm, they could ascend to the Great World. The purpose was to let the sinners of the lower realm provide an endless supply of arbiter of fate Xian Nu for Tiandu. As long as the arbiter of fate Xian Nu was not cut off, then the ancient immortal cultivators could once again build a soul bridge and return to Earth. This had to be mentioned. Only when the tide surged could Tiandu use the soul mirror to open the divine gate, allowing the celestials to ascend. This gate relied purely on the power of the tide to open, so only a few people could enter at a time. The higher the cultivation of the person who passed through the gate, the more difficult it would be to pass through the gate. It was like a giant trying to force his way into a dwarf's house. His huge body would naturally be stuck in the doorframe. Unless the giant comprehended the true meaning of the word void, he would be able to open a new gate on his own. Otherwise, he could only obediently wait outside the gate. The reason why heavenly venerable wondrous spells could come to the lower realm was entirely because of the cultivation technique he practiced. He could pass through the divine gate with his clone so he could bring Wuxia to the lower realm to check out the situation. Xianxia quickly finished reading the contents of the ancient book. However, after reading it, his brows furrowed tightly. If that's the case, Yingying's soul didn't dissipate for no reason, but was forcibly taken away by the soul mirror? Using the soul mirror to take away Xiannu's soul and build a soul bridge that can allow millions of people to cross the two realms at the same time. In other words. Chapter 409. Building the soul bridge and opening the heaven gate. Returning to the human realm. Xianxia wasn't very concerned about this. He only cared about one thing, and that was the soul mirror. According to ancient records, once the sky-bearing mirror was fully activated, the sky-bearing mirror would be activated. Then the 5 holy temples in the lower realm and the 13 soul-amassing cauldrons in the various branches would be activated at the same time. From there they would build a super-large teleportation formation across the two realms, the so-called soul bridge. Soul bridge. More accurately speaking, the soul bridge should be called the Bridge of Forgetfulness, right? The river of forgetfulness beside the Bridge of Forgetfulness. Ancient cultivators walked leisurely on the bridge, but the river of forgetfulness beneath the bridge flowed with the blood and vengeful souls of the Siming Xiannu. In reality, there were no special requirements to become the Siming Xiannu. All one had to do was be a woman. As the Siming Xiannu gradually became a symbol of status, a series of additional requirements were added to the land of legacy in the lower realm. Of course, the Siming Xiannu that everyone in the village respected was actually just a stepping stone for the ancient cultivators to cross the river. The moment they became the Siming Xiannu, their souls were already offered to the soul-amassing cauldron. Even after death, their remnant souls would automatically fly into the soul-amassing cauldron and be stored in the cauldron as souls. It was only then that the Siming Xiannu would truly usher in their tragic lives. Because their souls hadn't perished, they would instead endure endless torment and burning in the soul-amassing cauldron until the soul mirror opened. Only then would they truly be liberated. Turning to ashes was a form of liberation. Xianxia returned the ancient book to Zhang Yan. Then, without saying a word, he cupped his hands and thanked Zhang Yan. Then he silently turned and walked out of the Jiang clan ancestral hall. Bai Hong had been waiting outside. When she saw Xianxia come out, she immediately approached him to ask about the situation. But he didn't expect that Xianxia would grab him and Zhou Xian and fly straight back to Shangjing. As soon as Xianxia left, Jiang Yan followed behind. However, by the time he looked up, Xianxia's figure had completely disappeared from the sky above Daiyu Island. Seeing this, the corners of Jiang Yan's mouth immediately curled up into a meaningful smile. Xianxia flew very quickly and returned to Shangjing in the blink of an eye. This time he didn't let Bai Hong and Zhou Xian enter the house. Instead, he casually threw them into the alley and used his true essence to control them. Xianxia had left so suddenly that the little girl couldn't find her father after looking around the yard, so she ran to the room to watch TV. One had to know that although Xianxia did not waste much time on the road, but this time he was looking for Zhou Xian and Jiang Yan, so Xianxia wasted more than an hour. The sky had completely darkened. Under the dim night sky, the small bar by the beach was bustling again. Only this courtyard that used to be bustling with noise and excitement. At this moment, it was still deserted. Even the lights in the courtyard were not turned on. The little girl had been hungry for a long time. However, even though her stomach was growling, she didn't cry for her father. Instead, she quietly curled up in a corner of the sofa. In such a big house, only the big cat was still by her side. "Big cat, do you know where Daddy went?" Meow meow meow. The big cat let out a series of sweet noises. As if to comfort the little girl, the big cat moved closer to her, then stretched out its head and rubbed against her leg. "Big cat, are you hungry?" "I'm hungry too." As she spoke, the little girl rubbed her little belly. She didn't cultivate, so naturally she didn't know how to fast. The feeling of being hungry was something she had never experienced before. "Daddy's not at home, so we can't run around. We have to be good at home and wait for Daddy to come back and make us delicious food." The little girl hugged the big cat in her arms, then as if to cheer herself up, she pouted and said these words of self-encouragement. Although she said this, the little girl still looked back at Qin Ruing from time to time, then turned her head to look out the window. It was pitch black outside. Only the sound of the cold wind blowing could be heard. Because of this, a sense of confusion that she had never felt before appeared in her big bright eyes. Where did Daddy go? The little girl waited bitterly. Finally, Xianxia arrived home. As soon as he stepped into the courtyard, Xianxia found that the house was dark, so he used his inner energy to turn on all the lights. In an instant, the lights were brightly lit, flowing with light and color. Qin Ruoying was bedridden, so his sister-in-law naturally couldn't escape this calamity. Qiao Yuan went home for the holidays, while his father-in-law was still in seclusion in his room, unaware of the outside world. Right now, in this huge courtyard of the Qin family, only a 5-year-old child was still moving around freely. But she was still so young, she didn't even know how to turn on the lights. Thinking of this, Qianxi's expression couldn't help but darken. He quickly walked to the west wing. Daddy's back. The moment the lights came on, the little girl excitedly jumped down from the sofa, then eagerly hugged the big cat and rushed out of the room. Daddy, where did you go? I missed you so much. Although they hadn't seen each other for more than an hour, the little girl really missed Xianxia very much. On one hand, it was because she was afraid of the dark. On the other hand, of course, it was because she was hungry. Hungry, right? Let's go, Daddy will take you to cook. Unlike usual, Xianxia didn't apologize to the little girl immediately this time, but carried her directly to the kitchen. The little girl naturally didn't notice this difference. As soon as she heard that her father was going to make delicious food for her, this little girl instantly threw all her worries to the back of her head, then excitedly rode on Qianxi's shoulder, smiling as she waited for her father to make delicious food for her. Soon the father and daughter had a full meal. After filling her stomach, the little girl clung to Qianxi's side as usual, then pulled Xianxia to watch cartoons with her. But because her biological clock hadn't been adjusted, before 9 o'clock, the little girl kept yawning. Seeing this, Xianxia led her to the bathroom, then washed her up. Wash clean, put on a nice towel, lie on the bed. Hey. Maybe because she was in a good mood, the little girl even hummed the little song that the teacher taught her. Looking at her innocent and cute appearance, Qianxi's face finally showed a trace of a smile from the bottom of his heart. However, this trace of a smile didn't last long. When Qianxia carried the little girl back to the bed, watching the little girl as usual, tiptoeing to Qin Ruoying's side and lying down, Qianxia could no longer suppress the raging emotions in his heart, and tears suddenly flowed out. This had nothing to do with cultivation. It was the truest feeling in his heart at this moment. In order to prevent the little girl from seeing him, Qianxia used an illusion to cover his face. Daddy, tell me a story. Just one. After hearing it, I'll go to sleep obediently. Hey, since you're so obedient, Daddy will tell you to. Muah. Daddy is so good. So Qianxia hugged the little girl and softly told her a simple and childish story one after another in her ear. It wasn't until the little guy fell asleep that Qianxia finally stopped. He quietly looked at the two most important women in his life. They slept sweetly and peacefully, and nothing could disturb them. Just as Qianxia had once promised. Even if the sky collapses, I'll hold it up for you. I'm Yingying's husband. And also Nian Yan's father. For Yingying, he couldn't let Tiandu build a soul bridge. Because the moment the soul bridge was formed, Yingying's soul would scatter. So he had to dare to go to Tiandu before the soul bridge was built to ask for an explanation for his lover. But if he went, he didn't know when he would come back. Because he wasn't completely sure. And this was also the first time since Qianxia returned that he did something he wasn't sure of. But he had to do it. Qianxia wouldn't leave quietly, so he had to accompany Nian Yan for a night, and tell her everything tomorrow. In order to save Mommy, Daddy had to leave temporarily for a while. Nian Yan, wait for me. Daddy will definitely come back. Hey, in order to prevent the big shots from exploding mentally, let's give them a heads up. This isn't a sadistic novel, and I'm not interested in killing my wife. But the plot has to move forward, right? I can't stay in the tea house all day, can I? Life has to have some ups and downs. Humans only grow when they experience things. Makes sense, right? Long live understanding. Chapter 4:10. The next morning. When the little fellow slowly woke up from her sleep, the sun was already high in the sky. Because of the orientation of the room, the sunlight shone directly on her face through the window, immediately making her little face bright red. The little fellow rubbed her eyes and then sat up from the bed with great effort. After habitually calling out Daddy, she then lowered her head to look at Qin Ruoying. Good morning, Mommy. The little fellow greeted her mother sweetly, but Qin Ruoying still did not respond. She just lay quietly on the bed like that. There was no breath, no heartbeat, and of course no movement. If one looked at it from a secular perspective, this child actually slept with her mother's corpse every day. Thinking about it carefully, this scene was really strange and even gave people a chilling feeling. Fortunately, the little fellow did not think so. In her mind, her mother was just sick, a very, very sick person. Daddy was busy taking care of her mother, so sometimes he neglected her. The little fellow did not want to cause trouble for her father. Therefore, she called out to her father, but her father did not appear for a long time. The child imitated her father's usual behavior, gently pecked her mother's cheek and then got up from the bed. Then the little fellow ran into the bathroom, stepped on a small stool and began to wash herself. Brushing her teeth was too troublesome, so the little fellow directly skipped this process. She took a towel and wiped her face carelessly and the washing was done. At this time, Qin Yongyan, who had not shown up for a long time, followed Xianxia out of the main hall. "Good morning, Grandpa." The moment she saw Qin Yongyan, the little fellow very intimately went to his side, and immediately made Qin Yongyan laugh loudly. The 3 generations of grandfather and grandson sat around the small table and had breakfast. During this time, everything was as warm and peaceful as usual. She cleared the table and then called the little fellow to his side. "Nian, Daddy wants to discuss something with you. What is it?" The little fellow tilted her head, her big eyes filled with confusion. "Mom's condition has worsened. Dad has to go abroad to get the best doctor for Mom. But it's very far overseas. Once Father goes, it might be a very, very long time before I can return." The little fellow did not reply immediately. She pursed her lips and looked at Xianxia eagerly, as if she was still thinking about the meaning of his words. "Yin, be good. After Daddy leaves, don't be afraid, because Mom, Auntie and Grandpa are all by your side. And the big cat, big head, they will always be with you. Mom and Auntie are both sick. They can't take care of you anymore, but Grandpa can. So I'll have to trouble Grandpa to cook for you and take care of your life in the future. Grandpa is already so old. He's not as young as Dad. He doesn't have enough energy to play with you. Promise Daddy that you'll listen to Grandpa in the future, okay?" She gently held Nian in his arms and whispered many things into her ear. He knew that Nian might not be able to remember it. But he had no choice. He still had to say these words to Nian. This was Daddy's reluctance and also his parting words. The little fellow was still young, so she did not know what Xi's words meant. She only remembered one thing, and that was, Daddy was leaving. He was going to a very, very far place. Because Mom was sick, Daddy had to find a way to treat Mom. The little fellow knew what was important. So even if she was a little unhappy, she did not cry and make a fuss to stop Xianxia from leaving. Instead, she looked up and asked seriously, "Daddy, how long will you be away? When will you come back?" As soon as this question came out, Xianxia fell silent. After a long silence, he reluctantly squeezed out a smile and said to the little fellow, "It won't be long. You know, Daddy has been abroad before. Now that I have experience, I should be able to come back soon." The little fellow nodded as if she had understood something. Then, as if she suddenly thought of something, she hurriedly asked, "Dad, what should I do if I miss you?" Hearing this, Xianxia fell silent again. Because he really did not know how to answer. Should he continue to deceive her? Or should he cruelly tell her the truth? Once he left, he didn't know when he would see him again. Just thinking about it was enough to break his heart. The little fellow saw that Xianxia did not answer for a long time. After blinking her eyes, she thought of a solution for herself. "Daddy, if I miss you, then I'll video call you." Looking at the little fellow's expectant eyes, Xianxia finally nodded decisively this time. This was a solution he did not think of. Now that technology was developing so rapidly, it should not be difficult to simulate his image and deceive the little fellow, right? The father and daughter had a lot of private conversations today. They talked from morning to afternoon. When the sun was about to set, the little fellow, led by Qin Yongyan, personally sent Xianxia to the door. She tiptoed and took the initiative to kiss Xianxi's left and right cheeks. Then she said with a reluctant face, "Daddy, you have to come back early, I'll miss you." "Hey, Daddy promises you." While speaking, Xianxia gently left a kiss on the little fellow's forehead. The father and daughter parted ways. Xianxia strode away and did not look back along the way. But until his figure disappeared at the end of the alley, the little fellow was still waving her little hand in the direction he left. "Daddy, come back early." After saying goodbye to the little fellow and making a series of preparations, Xianxia took Bai Hong and Shui Xiang back to the familiar place, Karakoram Kunlun. the closest place to heaven. Xianxia found the ruins of the sundial temple based on his memory, then sat down cross-legged in the middle of the ruins. Sitting down, he sat for a whole 3 days and 3 nights. It was not until the morning of the 4th day that Xianxia finally woke up from his meditation and took out the sound-transmitting talisman that Jiang Yan gave him from his bosom. This was a sound-transmitting talisman that could directly contact Tiandu. It was a rare stock from ancient times. He did not know where Jiang Yan got it from. Right now, Tiandu was preparing to build a soul bridge. No matter how turbulent the spiritual qi in the lower realm was, it was impossible for Tiandu to withdraw the soul mirror that was in use. Since the gate of heaven refused to open, then Xianxia could only think of a way to forcibly open the gate of heaven himself. This sound-transmitting talisman became the key, because he wanted to use this sound-transmitting talisman to locate the position of Tiandu and thus pry open the gate of heaven. This was also the solution that Xianxia and Jiang Yan finally came up with after a detailed discussion. Since the moment Qin Ruiying's soul dissipated, Bai Hong had been reduced to a prisoner again. So he could only be locked to one side like Shui Xiang, anxiously watching Xianxia's strange actions. They saw, after Xianxia ignited the talisman, he leaped into the air. Then, under the dumbfounded expressions of the two people, Xianxia held the flowing cloud sword in his hand, mobilized all the vital essence in his body and fiercely slashed at the sky. In an instant, the mountains shook, the wind and snow trembled. After 3 days of meditation, Xianxia gathered all the vital essence in his body to one point. The moment the sword was drawn, the whole world fell silent. Immediately after, the sword qi grew bigger and bigger. Every time it flew up a meter, the sword qi would violently expand at a speed visible to the naked eye. As the sword qi continued to expand, it finally showed a kind of earth-shattering momentum, rolling up all the fluttering snowflakes between heaven and earth, like a pillar that supported the heavens crashing into the clouds. Only then did Bai Hong suddenly widen his eyes, finally understanding what Xianxia was doing. He was going to use his own strength. Chapter 4:11. After 3 days of recuperation, Xianxia finally slashed out with his sword. This was also the first time he had launched an attack in his peak state since returning to Earth. Of course, the target of his attack wasn't a person or object, and it was the boundless sky. The elegance of this sword could be said to be shocking the world. If one were to overlook the Earth from space, they would be able to clearly see that on the surface of this blue planet, a beam of light suddenly shot up into the sky like a celestial pillar. The dazzling sword light tore through the clouds, and the quintessential essence dispersed like ripples, spreading out wave after wave. Wherever the true essence went, the climate of the area would even change dramatically. The northern part of the land of polar night suddenly became as bright as day. Heavy rain suddenly fell on the parched and scorching Africa. Even Hawaii, which was like spring all year round, welcomed a strange snowstorm at this moment. The clouds were like confetti in a bottle, shaking violently with the shaking of the bottle. As a result, abnormal weather conditions appeared in various areas. The torrential rain had yet to stop, but the sun had already risen in the blink of an eye. The atmosphere became unbearably turbulent, and the turbulence caused by the true essence almost affected all the flights around the world. In the blink of an eye, the emergency communications from the captains blew up the command towers of various airports. Feeling the violent shaking of the plane, the unlucky passengers felt as if doomsday was coming. Some of the pessimists even began to write their wills. At this moment, how insignificant were the weak mortals. Thank goodness. This sudden change in weather didn't last long and everything soon returned to normal. After all, Xianxia was not a villain who had come to Earth to wreak havoc. He just wanted to force open the divine gate with his own strength. He was only one step away from the insightful emptiness realm. However, this one step of difference was like a heavenly moat in front of him. The peak of the divine transformation realm and the early Dongxi realm. It seemed like there was not much difference between them, but in reality the difference was like heaven and earth. If one were to say that they were only comprehending the laws of heaven and earth before the divine transformation stage, only after reaching the insightful emptiness realm could one truly be considered to be using the laws of heaven and earth. The true essence of the word void was the first law that an immortal cultivator had to master. And it was precisely because of this difference that Xianxia could only watch helplessly in the lower realm. Even though he knew that the soul mirror was the source of all suffering, he couldn't go to heaven capital to find a solution. The gate of heaven did not open, Could it be that he wasn't going? Xianxia naturally could not accept such an outcome. If Qin Ruing's soul really dissipated in front of his eyes, and he could only watch helplessly, it seemed that Xianxia would never forgive himself in this lifetime. Thus, he had no choice but to take the risk and forcefully open the passageway between the two worlds with his soul formation stage cultivation base. It must be mentioned here. Opening and opening were two completely different concepts. The Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had built enough connections between the two realms, so Xianxia didn't need to open up another channel. He only needed to open up the channel that was originally closed. Just like unblocking the sewers, with the sound transmission talisman as the coordinates, and the glorious sundial temple as the starting point. After 3 days of recuperation, Xianxia had accurately found the entry point between the big world and Earth through the voice-transmitting talisman. That was why he had made such a shocking move today. With his own strength, he opened the divine gate with his sword. Not long after the sword light was slashed out, Bai Hong's eyes suddenly widened. His lips trembled as he wanted to say something. But after moving his lips for a long time, he still couldn't say a word. This feeling, Bai Hong, was too familiar. It was the divine gate. The divine gate was really about to open. As expected, the moment the sword light disappeared, a violent storm suddenly blew up on the peak of the snow mountain where the three of them were. Then an extremely dazzling light suddenly bloomed from the void. Bai Hong took a closer look and found that although this light was much smaller than what they had seen in the past, the feeling it gave him was no different from the divine gate in his impression. The divine gate was actually forcefully opened by someone. Bai Hong looked at Xianxia not far away with a shocked expression. At this moment, Xianxia's slightly tired face finally revealed a gratified smile. This sword strike used 120% of his strength. After the sword strike, Xianxia was like an ordinary person who had just finished a marathon. He was sweating profusely, gasping for breath, and his mental state looked a little dispirited. However, just as Xianxia was about to smile, this light door was like a candle flame in the wind, and it began to shrink rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Seeing this, Xianxia couldn't help but tremble. Are you kidding me? The divine gate was going to close so soon. In a hurry, Xianxia didn't even have time to adjust his breathing. He grabbed Bai Hong and Zhou Xian and rushed into the light door as fast as he could. The three of them successfully rushed into the light door. Then this light door was like a broken light bulb. It suddenly burst out with an extremely dazzling light and then disappeared completely. Everything returned to silence. The wind and snow once again drifted on the peak of the snow mountain. The whistling cold wind continued to blow, and the snow quickly covered the traces left by the three of them. At the same time, Floating Mist Mountain, which was also located in Karakoram Kunlun, but little known to people, Jiang Yan was standing on the peak of the mountain with his hands behind his back. He stared in the direction of the light pillar with his sharp eyes. After the light pillar finally disappeared, Jiang Yan closed his eyes and carefully sensed it. That powerful aura disappeared. After confirming that there was no mistake, Jiang Yan's mouth suddenly curved into a faint smile. Then the smile on Jiang Yan's face became more and more brilliant. In the end, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Back to Xianxia and the other two. When Xianxia grabbed Bai Hong and Zhou Xian and plunged into the light door, his vision suddenly turned dark. Like a loach plunging headfirst into the mud, behind the light door, there was no light, no wind. There was no sound. Xianxia couldn't see anything. Wherever his divine sense went, it was empty in all directions. It was like a vacuum bag, there wasn't even any air here. Thus, Xianxia reached out and lit up a ball of light. But after the ball of light lit up, Xianxia still couldn't see anything. Other than his body, there was only endless darkness in this dark space. Where are the two of them? Xianxia looked around and couldn't help but feel puzzled. Bai Hong and Zhou Xian were personally captured by him and entered the heavenly gate. But after entering the door, Xianxia's connection with the two of them was completely cut off. Xianxia thought that he had been ambushed and subconsciously wanted to draw his sword, but he found that he had lost the flowing cloud sword at some point in time. Right now, he was only left with the training clothes he wore when he set off. Xianxia had no choice but to search aimlessly in this dark space. But after flying for a long time, he still hadn't reached the end. Along the way, there was nothing in the range of his divine sense. There was no other way. Xianxia could only try to fly down. But after flying for a long time, he couldn't find the ground. Xianxia thought that his sense of direction was wrong, so he flew horizontally again. This time he still flew for a long time. Xianxia still didn't fly to the border. Where's Tiandu? Where did Bai Hong and Shui Xiang go? What is this place? Xianxia was a little flustered. Everything in front of him was completely beyond his imagination. How to describe that feeling? He was now like a wisp of dust floating in the universe. But there were no planets in this universe, let alone anything that could be called an object. Apart from him, this universe was a complete vacuum, leaving behind only boundless darkness. He couldn't fly to the end. He couldn't see anything. There was no reference point. There was no gravity, no magnetic field, no radiation, and there was no spiritual energy of heaven and earth. F***CK. Chapter 412. Xianxia used to think that there was only one thing he couldn't figure out in his entire life, and that was, how did he get to Heavenly Spiral? Who would have thought? Xianxia hadn't even figured out the first thing, and the second thing that he couldn't figure out had already happened. This dark space was like a small black cell that imprisoned felons. At first, Xianxia tried to think of ways to escape. But as time passed, Xianxia realized that everything he did was useless. This place could be said to be, there was no road to heaven and no door to hell. Only boundless darkness enveloped him. Xianxia released tens of thousands of light balls. For every 100 kilometers he flew, he left a light ball in the darkness. He tried to use the light ball as a reference point to find the boundary of the dark space. But as time passed, Xianxia suddenly turned around and realized that even though the light balls he left behind had become a vast galaxy, he still couldn't fly to the boundary of the dark space. Perhaps this was the true meaning of boundless? After several fruitless attempts, Xianxia's true essence had already been consumed by about 70 to 80%. There was no heaven and earth spirit chi here. If this continued, Xianxia would be like a lamp that ran out of oil before they could find the exit. Xianxia had no choice but to give up struggling. Then he silently sat cross-legged in the darkness. In order to conserve his inner core, Xianxia didn't even light up the light balls again. The remaining inner core flowed slowly in his body, and Xianxia's brain worked quickly. He started to pay attention to the passage of time. 1 second, 1 minute, 1 moment, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. Xianxia's mind was firm. The endless darkness didn't cause him to lose his mind. But as time passed, Xianxia's heart gradually became heavy. He closed his eyes, then opened them. 3 months had passed. This dark space was clearly endless, but Xianxia felt especially oppressed. It was as if he would be swallowed by the darkness at any time. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't accept it. Once Tiandu built his soul bridge, Ying's divine soul would vanish into thin air. By then, even if the Daoist golden immortal descended, he would be powerless. Xianxia couldn't accept being trapped here. Because he still had a lot of things to do. In a moment of desperation, Xianxia flew up and down in the darkness like a headless fly, roaring loudly. He tried his best to make as much noise as possible. However, this dark space didn't even give him a trace of a reply. Very soon, a year passed. The long period of darkness and the mental pressure brought about by the rush to save Ying's to begin with, Xianxia's to begin to collapse. He grabbed his own hair with a pained expression, and could only let out a series of howls that were close to wailing. "Let me out. Let me out. Let me out, I beg you." His voice was loud and impassioned at first, but it gradually became low and hoarse. In the end, it completely turned into a feeble and pitiful pleading. In the blink of an eye, 10 years passed. Xianxia was in complete despair. He was like a puppet that had lost its soul. He floated numbly in the darkness, as silent as a corpse. If someone were to approach his body, they would hear his mouth squirming. He could still speak, but he just kept repeating this sentence. "It's too late, too late, too late, too late." 10 years had passed. Ying's soul should have long dissipated. Even if he were to be let out now, it was too late. It was hopeless. It was already hopeless. Xianxia clearly remembered every detail when he was with Ying. It was also because of this that the sweetness of the past had now become a sharp knife that ruthlessly slashed at his heart again and again. Self-blame, pain, regret, sadness, anxiety, worry, irritation, frustration, anger. All the negative emotions of human beings were gathered in Xianxia's heart at this moment. If it was possible, he would rather die than stay in this boundless darkness. Fortunately, Xianxia still had a glimmer of hope in his heart. Last year today in this door human faces and peach blossoms were rosy. I don't know where the human faces are, but the peach blossoms are still smiling in the spring breeze. He had already parted with Yingying once. He had stayed in heavenly spiral for 500 years, but only 5 years had passed on Earth. Who knew how many years a year in this godforsaken place was equivalent to on Earth? Thinking of this, Xianxia couldn't help but erupt with an extremely strong will to live. Yes. Before determining the time difference between the two worlds, how could he give up on himself? Before the moment the truth was revealed, how could he be hit by his own negative emotions first? Xianxia sat cross-legged again. He didn't want to think about those things anymore. Instead he began to repeatedly ponder the mystery of this dark space. Since this dark space could trap an immortal cultivator at the peak of the soul formation realm, it meant that this space was definitely extraordinary. Xianxia directly ruled out the possibility that Tiandu was behind this. It wasn't that he looked down on Tiandu, but that Tiandu really didn't have that ability. Even if the Grand Pure One was alive, it was absolutely impossible for him to play with him in the palm of his hand like this. As such, after pondering over it again and again, Xianxia suddenly had a guess in his heart. Could it be that there was an accident when he opened the heavenly gate with his sword, and that was why he barged into this endless dark space? Came uninvited? Waiting for him? Or catching a turtle in a jar? He hadn't comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he didn't understand what was needed to cross the two worlds. A huge amount of vital essence? Obviously it was more than that. Xianxia began to think about this problem seriously. Even if he was deep in darkness he had to maintain a clear mind. Xianxia kept thinking. But time never stopped waiting for him. In the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. Let's talk about Nian first. Ever since Xianxia left, the little girl had been thinking about him all the time. On one hand it was because grandpa's cooking was not as good as daddy's. On the other hand it was because mommy had been lying in bed motionless. Without the company of daddy and mommy, the little girl was indeed very uncomfortable and was not used to it. Therefore she had to video call Xianxia at least 10 times a day. Fortunately, before Xianxia left he had already made all the preparations. She didn't know what agreement he had reached with Wu Lian. In short, after Xianxia left, Wu Lian set up a team to deal with the little girl's video bombardment that could come at any time. Therefore, with the support of national technology, Xianxia's appearance could always appear vividly in front of the little girl. This also greatly eased the little girl's longing. Detective Conan could lie to Xiaolan until the end with just a phone call, let alone Xianxia who used a video call. Under the constant comfort of Xianxia, the little girl also welcomed a new year. This year's spring festival was much earlier than last year. February 4th. New Year's Eve. Early in the morning, Wang Chuanju and Qin Yongwang brought a large group of people to the Qin family's courtyard. In order to make the little girl happy, the big brothers and sisters from the various departments of the Martial Arts Alliance used all their strength. They practically treated her like a little princess. They held her in their hands, afraid that she would fall, and in their mouths, afraid that she would break. With so many people trying to make the little girl happy, even without the company of daddy and mommy, the little girl had a very happy new year. Chapter 413. Children don't remember things. Once there's something happy they'll quickly throw their worries aside. Nian is naturally the same. It's just that her happiness is like the tide, always coming in waves. After the tide recedes, there will still be a large beach full of holes poked by stone crabs. It's impossible for the little fellow to stay excited forever. Therefore, every night when she goes to bed, it's the time of the day when she misses her father the most. Xianxia was still telling her stories in the video, but the little girl didn't fall asleep after listening to it like she used to. She always asks her father to finish one story after another, as if she has inexhaustible energy. Every time this happens, Qin Yongyan will silently wait at the side. It wasn't until Xianxia on the other end of the video repeatedly ordered the little guy to sleep that the little guy would pout and lie back on the bed. At this time, Qin Yongyan will turn off the light and quietly leave the west wing. Qin Yongyan once thought of bringing the little fellow to live with him in the main room, but the little fellow is unwilling no matter what. She wants to sleep with her mother. Although her mother never responds to her, the little fellow has been staying in this courtyard full of spiritual energy, surrounded by all the cultivators above the celestial being stage. Under normal circumstances, The little fellow should have already become a child genius. But she didn't. Because Xianxia has already placed a seal on her. The little fellow's intelligence has always been at the level of a normal person. Xianxia only wants to give Nian a normal childhood. He doesn't want her to become a weirdo among her peers. Xianxia's reason for doing this is very good. Just like what Jack Ma said, the biggest mistake in my life is to establish Alibaba. But before this sentence there's actually another sentence. I regret that I'm always busy with work and have no time to accompany my family. If I can live again, I definitely won't be like this again. My wife said it well, you're not my person, you belong to Alibaba. The unscrupulous media took the words out of context, causing the meaning of this sentence to completely change. Cultivation is not a matter of time. For immortal cultivators with long lifespans, what did a few years count for? Nian only had one childhood. Why couldn't she be allowed to play happily for a few years without any worries? Xianxia's idea was very good. Unfortunately, a thought was just a thought. When Xianxia embarked on a strange journey to save Yingying, the happy life of the family of 3 was completely shattered. Xianxia considered that he might not be able to stay by Nian's side to protect her. So after hesitating for a while, he personally removed the first layer of the seal on Nian's body. When she turned 12 and 18, the second and third layers of the seal would automatically be removed. If by that time, if Xianxia hadn't come back yet, Qin Yongyan would have told Nian the truth. It was up to her to make her own choices in the future. Let's go back to that damn dark space. Since Xianxia broke the demonic barrier and kept his spiritual altar clear, time had become meaningless to him. There was no spiritual energy here, so breathing seemed to have become a kind of consumption. There wasn't much true qi left in Xianxia's body, so he could only gather the remaining true qi in order to keep his body alive. He hadn't moved for 100 years. There was nothing in the dark space, so naturally there couldn't be dust. So even if 100 years had passed, Xianxia didn't seem to have changed at all. The only change was, maybe it was a slight change in his demeanor. Xianxia had long been used to everything around him. After experiencing the initial anger and despair, his state of mind had become calmer. Before he saw it with his own eyes, he would never think in a bad way. What Xianxia was going through now was actually very similar to what Robinson was going through, but much more miserable than Robinson. After all, even if Robinson was trapped on an isolated island and didn't have enough food to eat and clothes to cover his body, Robinson still picked up a volleyball to amuse himself. What about Xianxia? Without being able to replenish the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, he didn't even dare to move. Deduce a cultivation technique. Could a mere soul formation cultivator deduce and optimize the Sky Yen divine sex treasured scripture? Try to understand the true meaning of the word void. Without practice, all great ideas were just empty words. Bored, Xianxia could only recall the bits and pieces of the past. Just like watching a TV series, he watched the story about himself over and over again, and every time he watched it he enjoyed it very much. Whenever he thought of how cute Nian was when she acted coquettishly in front of him, Xianxia's lips would even curl up into a faint smile. To be honest, with Xianxia's current state, his thinking had definitely improved by more than one level. Perhaps this was also a kind of training. Even if he was trapped, Xianxia had to be calm. In the blink of an eye, another 100 years had passed. After 200 years of darkness imprisonment, Xianxia's mind didn't collapse, but his body couldn't take it anymore. Because his true essence had long been exhausted. Without the support of true essence, there would be a day when the physical body would deteriorate. Once the physical body deteriorated, then Xianxia's soul wouldn't be far from dispersing. After all, this place didn't have a suitable physical body for him to possess. Thinking of this, Xianxia's withered face couldn't help but reveal a bitter smile. He persevered for a long time. He really tried his best. If possible, Xianxia hoped that time here would be much slower than the outside world. Because only then could he go to the bridge of helplessness and quietly wait for the arrival of his lover. I'm sorry. At this moment, Xianxia's heart was like dead ashes. He closed his eyes tightly and the remaining tears flowed out uncontrollably. However, just as Xianxia was floating in the darkness waiting for death, a ray of light suddenly appeared in the darkness. It was really light. However, the light was very weak and it seemed to be very far away from Xianxia. Xianxia didn't notice the appearance of this light. As his breath became weaker, the light became brighter and brighter. Finally, Xianxia noticed something strange. He hadn't seen light for more than 100 years. After feeling the abnormality caused by the light shining on his eyelids, Xianxia's eyelids suddenly trembled slightly. Then, he was like a drowning man twisting madly in the darkness. Xianxia used the last of his strength to open his eyes and saw that the light seemed to be right in front of him. Light. I'm saved. I'm saved. The moment he saw the light, Xianxia's heart suddenly exploded with an extremely strong will to live. He didn't know where he got the strength from, but his body suddenly bounced up, and then he tried his best to run towards the light at the fastest speed. As the light got closer and closer, Xianxia's pupils couldn't help but become bigger and bigger. He was a little excited and a little scared. He was afraid that everything in front of him was an illusion before he died. Thinking of this, Xianxia suddenly closed his eyes and then plunged into the light. By the time Xianxia's body was submerged in the light was like a firework instantly disappearing from the dark space. But at this moment, in this dark space that imprisoned Xianxia for 200 years, a woman's voice suddenly sounded. He can't die here. The woman seemed to be talking to someone. If Xianxia was still here, he would definitely feel that this woman's voice was very familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere before. Sure enough, as soon as the woman's voice fell, a man's voice immediately followed. This is the reason for your interference? Do you know what the consequences are? I know. It's good that you know. The conversation came to an abrupt end. Chapter 4:14. After Xianxia plunged into the light, a cool and refreshing feeling enveloped him. That feeling, it was like a traveler in the desert who had been exposed to the sun for 3 days and suddenly fell into an underground cold pool. The surging spiritual energy of heaven and earth flowed into his body, instantly causing Xianxia's dried-up dantian to glow with vitality. Xianxia gasped for breath and frantically grasped the surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth around him. He did not even care where he was. After jumping out of the light, he directly sat cross-legged on the ground and adjusted his breathing. Who cares what the situation is? In any case, he had to replenish his vital essence first. After about a level of vital essence in his body had recovered, Xianxia swept away the dispirited look on his face. At this moment he looked like a famous ancient sword that had just been unearthed. Although there was still a lot of mud on the surface, after unsheathing, the sharp edge of the sword still shone with a piercing cold light. Spiritual energy of heaven and earth. How long has it been since I felt such dense spiritual energy? Feeling the continuous accumulation of vital essence in his body, Xianxia could not help but look intoxicated, like a drunkard who had tasted the finest nectar. Then he finally opened his eyes slowly. After looking around, a trace of inexplicable surprise appeared on his face. I really escaped? This place, could it be the great world? Xianxia looked around and found himself in a strange place. The giant trees in this place towered into the sky, each one of them was hundreds of meters tall and incomparably thick. The ground was covered with dense vegetation formed by ferns and wood tapestry. Such a flourishing and dense forest scene almost dazzled Xianxia's eyes. One had to know that he had not seen anything for 200 years. Suddenly coming to such a lively place, Xianxia's heart was immediately filled with a kind of joy of seeing the light of day again. But immediately after that, Xianxia's face immediately darkened. He had been trapped in the dark space for 200 years, and did not know how long had passed in the outside world. If the soul bridge had been built, wouldn't Yingying's soul have been destroyed? How could that be? Thinking of this, Xianxia could no longer sit still. He didn't even bother to replenish his true essence and directly flew into the air above the dense forest, preparing to capture someone to ask about the situation. If Yingying was fine, that would be fine. If anything happened to Yingying, he would have to fight to the death with Tiandu for the rest of his life. As Xianxia prepared for the worst, he quickly flew into the air. However, when he flew out of the forest and into the sky, Xianxia suddenly discovered something. The great world before his eyes was completely different from what he had imagined. In Xianxia's imagination, the great world should be a planet like Earth. But what appeared in front of him now, they were countless floating islands in the void. Just like in the movie Avatar, these floating islands were either big or small. The vegetation on the islands was lush, and they all had a complete ecosystem. In fact, calling it a floating island didn't seem right. To be exact, it should be called a mountain. One mountain range after another floated in the void. After all, the great world was just a small plane in a crack in the void. It couldn't be measured by the common sense of the universe. There was no sun in the great world, and all the light came from the great sun-moon star formation that the Taiching divine ancestor had inscribed on the boundary of the plain. Under the illumination of the great sun-moon star formation, the great world had a day and night like Earth. He didn't know how big this space was. With just a cursory glance, Xianxia saw thousands of floating islands of different sizes, and the floating island he was on was considered relatively small. The floating islands were either high or low, and each island was surrounded by immortal clouds. Xianxia listened attentively and found that there were vigorous roars of beasts coming from the depths of the forest. Suddenly, a giant golden bird swept past Xianxia's eyes. After grabbing a strange beast the size of an elephant from the forest below him, the giant bird turned around and flew toward another floating island. Such a strange scene was really amazing. Because Xianxia had just escaped from the dark space, he had a better understanding of it. Thus, Xianxia looked into the distance and set his gaze beyond the group of floating islands, to a place where even the great sun-moon star formation couldn't illuminate. There was nothing but emptiness. It was still that endless darkness. Although there were many floating islands, they couldn't fill up such a huge dark space. This great world. Wasn't this the upgraded and expanded version of the dark space? If there were no surprises, this small plane should be similar to the dark space and there shouldn't be anything in it. After the Taiching divine ancestor discovered this plane, he moved countless mountains from somewhere, and that was how the great world became the size it was today. Mountains could be moved, but where did the rich spirit chi of heaven and earth come from? Xianxia was stunned by the Taiching divine ancestor's extravagance. Only now did he realize that his understanding of the Taiching divine ancestor was too one-sided. This great figure who had single-handedly turned the dark space into a cultivation holy land comparable to heavenly spiral and saved the ancient cultivators. What level had he reached? Insightful emptiness? Dao integration? Or perhaps the legendary tribulation true immortal? Xianxia frowned and pondered for a long time. In the end, he could only put these questions to the back of his mind. After all, he had more important things to do now. Presumably because the great world couldn't produce spirit chi on its own, Xianxia rested for a while and realized that the spirit chi of heaven and earth in the great world was only slightly richer than on earth. Perhaps this was the main reason why Tiandu had decided to return? For Yingying's sake, Xianxia had to stop Tiandu from building a soul bridge. It was still the same sentence. Even 200 years of imprisonment hadn't extinguished the last bit of hope in his heart. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, then Yingying would always be waiting for him to save her. Xianxia hid his figure and stealthily passed through the various floating islands. While grasping the spirit chi of heaven and earth on each island, he quickly flew in the direction of Tiandu. It was a pity that Baihong and Shui Xiang had run off somewhere. Otherwise, Xianxia could have prepared a battle plan in advance. How did Xianxia know where Tiandu was? Wasn't this nonsense? The island with the densest spirit chi and the largest floating island. Wasn't that Tiandu's headquarters? Xianxia didn't go near the largest floating island. Because his true essence was exhausted, it would take at least 3 months to recover to peak condition. He had endured 200 years, what more a mere 3 months? Xianxia wasn't in a hurry. In order to be able to observe Tiandu's movements at any time, he lurked on a nearby floating island. 3 months. Yingying, wait for me. When my true essence recovers, it will be the time when my true essence ends. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com. Wonderful book mobile version website. .com. Chapter 4:15. 3 months passed by in a flash. In order not to be detected, Xianxia plundered large amounts of heaven and earth spirit chi from hundreds of floating islands during this period of time. After all, he was a soul formation cultivator. Now that he was determined to cultivate in seclusion, how could outsiders easily detect him? The only thing that could attract the attention of Tiandu was probably the rate at which the spirit chi on these floating islands was dissipating. Xianxia's heart was always on the soul mirror, so when he was not cultivating he could not help but take time out to walk around a few times. As a result, he gradually gained a basic understanding of the great world. There were a total of 120,000 floating islands in the great world. If all the floating islands were piled together, the surface area was even larger than the moon, almost the size of Asia. The floating islands were not eternal. Once the heaven and earth spirit chi on the island was exhausted, the floating island would completely lose its vitality and float to the periphery of the floating islands. Xianxia had not figured out the source of the heaven and earth spirit chi for the time being. However, he was sure that the floating islands here were like batteries. After they were used up, they would not immediately become useless. Instead, they would float to the periphery and wait for the heaven and earth spirit chi to slowly recover. As for what kind of method did the floating islands use to recover their spirit chi? Obviously, Xianxia still needed to observe for a while more. Every island had its own ecosystem. Apart from heaven and earth treasures and rare beasts, of course, there were also many descendants of ancient cultivators living here. Xianxia went to a few nearby floating islands, but found that these people were like the Jiang clan who were holed up in Daiyu Island. They had a clear concept of community, and it could be said that each island did not interfere with the other's business. You're on your island, I'm on mine. Everyone abided by their duties, and it seemed that they would never interact with each other. On this day, after Xianxia cultivated for 36 cycles as usual, he let out a deep breath of turbid qi. Although the great world had begun to decline, the density of heaven and earth spirit qi was still comparable to when the tides were surging in the lower realm. Therefore his true yuan recovered very quickly. Now that he had mostly recovered, he estimated that he would be able to return to his peak state in a few days. And as his condition improved, the strange phenomena caused by Xianxia's cultivation also became more and more powerful. Therefore, although the mountain peak he was on was covered by a concealing array, as long as someone stepped into the array, they would be able to see the spiritual energy of heaven and earth swarming towards them like clouds and mist. From afar, it was as if Xianxia was sitting at the bottom of a huge funnel, and Bicker was constantly pouring spiritual energy into his body. While Xianxia was busy sorting out the true essence in his body, a figure suddenly flew out from the floating island where Tiandu was and arrived above Xianxia's floating island in the blink of an eye. Xianxia only took a cursory glance and discovered that this person's true essence was thick and his aura was incomparably powerful. He was at least in existence on the same level as Bai Hong. Divine General? In fact, in the 3 months that Xianxia had been here, she had discovered a strange thing. Apart from the floating island where Tiandu was, he didn't find any divine general-level cultivators on the other floating islands. This was obviously somewhat illogical. As the saying goes, only by knowing yourself and your enemy can you win 100 battles. Although Xianxia's overall plan was disrupted by the sudden appearance of the dark space, he still learned the general structure of Tiandu from Bai Hong in advance. First of all, the celestial lords of 10 directions, led by Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others, were the core of the entire Tiandu. These 10 people were also the strongest in the big world. Xianxia hadn't fought with a celestial lord yet, but from Bai Hong's description, Xianxia could basically conclude that a celestial lord should be equivalent to a cultivator at the divinity transformation stage. As for whether a celestial lord or a divinity transformation cultivator was stronger or weaker, this question was obviously only known to Xianxia after he personally fought with one. In addition to the celestial lords of 10 directions, Tiandu also had the divine generals of 5 directions, who were respectively in charge of the east, south, west, north, and center. There were a total of 36 people. 10 celestial lords and 36 divine generals of 5 directions. In addition, there were 72 Rakshasa lords whose strength was second only to the divine generals, as well as countless celestial lords. It wasn't that Xianxia wanted to boost the morale of others and belittle his own prestige, but with Tiandu's strength and foundation even in the Tiandu domain, it was enough to dominate a region. In the past 3 months, Xianxia hadn't seen any divine generals or celestial lords, so he gradually became a little uneasy. Could it be Tiandu had already built a soul bridge and went to the lower realm? Every time he thought of this, Xianxia couldn't help but worry in his heart, and was very eager to go to Tiandu to see the situation. But considering that his cultivation had not yet recovered, and that he would definitely not end well if he stood out, Xianxia could only forcibly suppress this terrible thought. 200 years had passed and there was no point in being anxious. Therefore Xianxia had even prepared for the worst. If Yingying was fine, then it would be fine, but if something happened to Yingying, even if he risked his old life, he was bound to bite off a large piece of Tiandu's flesh. Since he couldn't be with her for the rest of his life, then he must avenge her for the rest of his life, until he died. Xianxia's mind was full of twists and turns. When he saw the divine general appear, he was immediately overjoyed instead of shocked, and hurriedly followed him secretly. The divine general didn't stay in the air for long. After hurriedly sweeping a glance around the floating island, He directly landed on the square in the center of the floating island. This divine general was about 30 years old and seemed to be slightly older than Bai Hong. His appearance was rather rough and his armor shone with a cold light, looking particularly impressive. As soon as he landed, the divine general frowned and asked the crowd, "Who sounded the dragon's alarm drum?" At this time the residents of the island had all gathered here. One of the elders seemed to be the person in charge of this floating island, so he immediately stepped forward and replied, "Reporting to Divine General Qin Yang, this old man is the peak's head, Fu Anxing." It was this old man who ordered people to sound the dragon's alarm drum. Hearing this, the man called Divine General Qin Yang sized up the old man. This floating island was called Amethyst Peak, and the peak's head was the highest leader of this floating island, roughly equivalent to the village chief of a village. Do you know the consequences of recklessly sounding the dragon's alarm drum? Of course this old man knows, but this matter is very serious. I hope Divine General Qin Yang can resolve this problem for my Amethyst Peak. What exactly is the matter? Divine General Qin Yang patiently asked a few questions before learning the whole story from the old man. It turned out that there was a problem with Amethyst Peak's dragon's vein. Each floating island only had one dragon's vein, and the dragon's vein was the lifeblood of the entire floating island, and at the same time, the source of the island's spirit qi. Under normal circumstances, Amethyst Peak's dragon's vein would dry up after at least 100 years. However, this dragon's vein had some kind of problem, and the spirit qi it produced every day was gradually decreasing. In the past few days it was on the verge of death. At this rate, Amethyst Peak would probably be abandoned in a few months. Since the elder was a peak's head, how could he not panic? Bring me to take a look. After a simple negotiation, the elder led Divine General Qin Yang to the dragon's vein to check it out. It was obvious that the drying up of Amethyst Peak's dragon's vein had something to do with Qinshi. This floating island was the closest to Tiandu, and Qinshi had spent the most time on this floating island, so he had cut off almost half of the spirit qi produced by the dragon's vein. Who would have thought that this would alarm Divine General Tiandu? Now that Qinshi was done with his work, the dragon's vein naturally returned to normal. Divine General Qin Yang took a closer look, and after finding that the problem wasn't very big, he roared at the elder angrily. Yuan Tianzuan ordered the 5 divine generals to gather at the Imperial Extreme Palace, and you sounded the dragon's alarm drum for such a small matter? I think you're trying to hang yourself. Are you tired of living? Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 416. One must know that the dragon's scare drum was similar to a beacon tower. Whenever the dragon's scare drum sounded, the 5 divine generals closest to the island had to immediately put down whatever they were doing and rush over to check on the situation as quickly as possible. However, after Divine General Qin Yang's inspection, he discovered that although the output of the dragon's vein was low, it was far from the level where the dragon's scare drum was sounded. What was this? In ancient times, there was King Yu of Zhou toying with the warlords with the beacon fire, and now there was Fu Anxing toying with the divine general with the dragon's scare divine general? One could only imagine how furious Divine General Qin Yang was at this moment. At this time, Fu Anxing also discovered that the dragon's vein was fine, so he instantly knew that he had gotten himself into big trouble today. He hurriedly knelt on the ground and begged Divine General Qin Yang with a terrified expression, "Divine General, please forgive me. This matter is indeed this old man's oversight. It's just that there really was something wrong with the dragon's vein a few days ago, causing us to be unable to cultivate smoothly." At this point, Fu Anxing could not help but look at the dragon's vein with a puzzled expression before continuing to defend himself. To tell you the truth, just before we sounded the dragon's scare drum, this old man had specially sent someone to verify it. Who would have thought? The dragon's scare drum had just sounded and the dragon's vein returned to normal. Before he finished speaking, Fu Anxing looked like he wanted to cry but had no tears. Even if he had 10 times the courage, he would not dare to casually make fun of the divine general. The goddamn dragon's vein. This time he was really in deep trouble. Even in a society ruled by law, false police reports could be detained, let alone in a feudal society with a strict hierarchy like Tiandu. Therefore, Fu Anxing's defense did not have any effect. Divine General Qin Yang could not be bothered to talk nonsense with him. With a wave of his hand, he ordered his men to send Fu Anxing to the death row. This was a critical period and everyone in Tiandu was extremely tense. Therefore, the matter of Fu Anxing sounding the dragon's scare drum could only be investigated later. Subsequently, Divine General Qin Yang warned the people of Purple Jade Peak, then turned and flew back to the floating island where Tiandu was located. Seeing this, Xianxia immediately followed, turning into a stream of light and sticking closely behind Divine General Qin Yang. Divine General Qin Yang was only at the Yuanying stage, so he naturally didn't notice that there was a tail behind him. Therefore Qin Shi, led by Divine General Qin Yang, passed through the formation and smoothly arrived at the core of the macro world. Tiandu Dragon Head Peak. There was a very powerful array around the Dragon Head Peak, which was also one of the reasons why Qin Shi did not dare to get too close to it. With Divine General Qin Yang paving the way, Qin Shi was naturally able to barge in very easily. And the reason why Qin Shi's infiltration was so smooth was not because the defensive power of Tiandu was so weak, but mainly because ever since the Grand Pure Saint Ancestor established the heavenly capital, the Dragon Head Peak had been a forbidden area in the entire Great World. Who would dare to sneak in without permission? This was a path of no return. However, Qin Shi did not consider whether it was dangerous at all. Instead, he resolutely barged in. As soon as he entered the array, Qin Shi discovered that the spirit qi on the Dragon Head Peak was exceptionally rich, several times richer than the outside world. It was comparable to the heart-cleansing spirit spring in the forbidden area of the back mountain of the Sky Yen divine sect. This place. In addition to the rich spirit qi, Qin Shi also discovered that the interior of the array was filled with an extremely unusual energy fluctuation. Qin Shi had never seen such a fluctuation before, so he frowned and sensed for a while before a guess gradually formed in his mind. This strange energy fluctuation. Could it be from the soul mirror? At this thought, Qin Shi did not care if he had recovered to his peak state and immediately followed Divine General Qin Yang to the core area of the Dragon Head Peak. The core area of the Dragon Head Peak was naturally the core area of the entire macro world. The Lingxiao Imperial Palace. Qin Shi silently followed behind Divine General Qin Yang. But before he could see the palace, Divine General Qin Yang had already landed on the ground and walked along a small path to the peak. Instead of flying, he insisted on walking. Divine General Qin Yang's strange behavior was completely due to the rules of Heaven Capital since ancient times. The Dragon Head Peak was the head of the 120,000 floating islands, and the Imperial Palace was located at the peak of the Dragon Head Peak. Therefore, apart from the 10 heavenly venerables, no one could be above the Imperial Palace. Not even a Divine General. Qin Shi obediently followed behind Divine General Qin Yang and walked all the way to the peak of the mountain. As soon as he reached the peak of the mountain, his vision suddenly opened up. Following which, Qin Shi discovered that the peak of the Dragon Head Peak was extremely flat, as if someone had used a sword to flatten it. At the same time, a huge palace that spanned across the peak of the mountain entered Qin Shi's eyes. This is the Imperial Palace? The Imperial Palace spanned across the peak of the Dragon Head Peak, and the first impression it gave was that it was majestic and magnificent. However, Qin Shi didn't even have time to carefully observe the Imperial Extreme Hall in front of him. His attention was completely attracted by the plaza at the entrance of the hall. This was a huge plaza that was comparable in size to the Zhonghai Gymnasium. There seemed to be some kind of activity going on in the plaza, and there were actually many people sitting cross-legged there. At a rough count, there were at least a few thousand people. However, although there were many people in the plaza, it wasn't enough to make Qin Shi stop and look. What he really cared about was it was that copper mirror that was floating in the middle of the plaza and constantly emitting divine light. In an instant. 10,000 years in a glance. The moment Qin Shi saw this Dharma treasure, the name of this Dharma treasure suddenly jumped out from the bottom of his heart. Sky-bearing technique floating dawn mirror. Qin Shi silently sized up the soul mirror in front of him. The soul mirror was constantly shining with divine light, and an unknown energy wave was constantly circulating around it. With one look, one could tell that such a phenomenon was definitely not ordinary. However, in front of a supreme treasure, Qin Shi couldn't help but feel a sense of disgust, and he couldn't help but want to smash it into pieces. It was this stupid mirror. It was the one that caused his family to be separated, and he almost lost his family. Thinking of this, Qin Shi couldn't help but have a murderous look in his eyes, and he couldn't help but want to take it away on the spot. However, just as Qin Shi was about to do something evil, An old man sitting cross-legged in the middle of the hall seemed to have noticed something, and then he suddenly opened his eyes and shouted sternly outside the hall, "Who is it? How dare you come to my Dragon Head Peak and behave so atrociously?" Before he finished speaking, the old man raised his hand and waved his sleeve. A golden light flew out and directly shot towards Xianxia at the other end of the plaza. This move came too suddenly. Xianxia didn't even have time to react, and the golden light had already arrived in front of him. Seeing this, Xianxia's heart couldn't help but skip a beat. Feeling the powerful true essence contained in it, Xianxia hurriedly withdrew the aura concealment secret technique, and then like the old man he waved his sleeve and released a burst of true essence. Then a white light suddenly shot out from Xianxia's palm and collided with the golden light. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 417. The Imperial Hall was the core area of Tiandu, so the celestial venerables of the 10 directions naturally had the most complete control over this place. Although Xianxia had the aura concealment secret technique to protect his body, the moment he saw the sky-bearing technique, he couldn't help but feel a ripple in his heart. That was why a celestial venerable sitting cross-legged in the main hall sensed something strange. And this celestial venerable who keenly sensed that someone had trespassed on Dragon Head Peak was someone Xianxia had long heard of, Yuhuan Tianzuan. Although they had never met before, Yuhuan Tianzuan's reputation had long been branded in Xianxia's heart. After all, apart from being Wuxia's biological father, Yuhuan Tianzuan was also the leader of the 10 celestial venerables. If Tiandu was compared to a large multinational company, then Yuhuan Tianzuan was obviously the executive chairman of the company. One could imagine how powerful he was. Therefore, when Yuhuan Tianzuan casually released a burst of true essence, everyone was alarmed. That golden light came too suddenly. After shooting out of the main hall, it was like a laser that pierced through the entire square. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help but look sideways. Just as everyone was feeling strange, a figure appeared out of thin air in front of the originally empty mountain gate. Immediately after, that person casually released a ray of white light under the gazes of everyone, colliding with the golden light that shot out from the main hall. Bang! Suddenly a huge explosion sounded. After all, it was a battle between celestial venerables, so the few Star Lords closest to the center of the explosion were sent flying by the dispersing force. This scene was very similar to the school field at noon. Thousands of teachers and students were excitedly doing broadcast gymnastics. Suddenly, the flag-raising platform exploded for no reason. It was easy to imagine how shocked and astonished everyone present was. In the tens of thousands of years of history of Tiandu, it wasn't that no one had caused trouble on Dragon Head Peak Square. But to dare to cause trouble when all the celestial venerables were gathered on Dragon Head Peak. Xianxia was the first. As the explosion gradually subsided, Xianxia's figure was clearly reflected in everyone's eyes. At the sight of this audacious intruder, some nearby immortal generals uttered long roars at once as they rushed towards Xianxia at the same time. "How dare you! Everyone follow me and take him down. I'd like to see which bastard dares to behave atrociously on Dragon Head Peak." What kind of joke was this? The 5 divine generals were in charge of guarding one area. Right now, all the divine generals were gathered at Dragon Head Peak, but someone still secretly touched their faces. If this wasn't collective dereliction of duty, then what was? Therefore, even without the orders of the celestial venerables, a divine general was dispatched from each direction to charge at Xianxia. Today they had to take down this audacious intruder at the first possible moment and give the Empyreans an explanation. Everyone tacitly agreed that the intruder was doomed. But right at that moment, however, a shocking scene suddenly occurred. The 5 divine generals charged at the intruder from different directions at an extremely fast speed. However, the intruder didn't turn around and run away immediately. Instead, he frowned and clenched his right hand into a fist. Instantly, a long sword condensed from true essence appeared in his hand. Seeing this, the 5 divine generals were instantly enraged like provoked ferocious beasts. They couldn't help but want to tear this audacious intruder into pieces on the spot. Therefore, the 5 divine generals each took out their own trump cards. Regardless of whether this fellow could withstand it, the 5 divine generals roared angrily and launched an attack together. In an instant, brilliant light shot in all directions and the void shook. Surging true essence wreaked havoc in the air above the square. All kinds of Dharma treasures carried the endless anger of their owners and heavily smashed towards the intruder's location. At this moment, the long sword in Xianxi's hand also began to dance. The Dharma idol's long sword shone with a green light and shone brightly in his hand. Even compared to the colorful Dharma treasures in the hands of the divine generals, the Dharma idols of the divine generals did not lose out in terms of appearance. Xianxi's original plan was to sneak in and observe. He didn't want to alert the enemy. But now that the infiltration failed, he could only come up with Plan B. Plan B was actually very simple. That was, becoming famous in one battle. Establishing dominance through battle. Showing his strength at the peak of the soul formation stage to win respect and then talk to the 10 celestial lords as equals. Since he wanted to establish dominance, he had to show 120% of his ability in the first move. Although the moonlight sword technique was exquisite, it was not shocking enough. So after Xianxia thought about it for a while, just now he took out the killing weapon that he had always been unwilling to use in actual combat, the Xuanpu sword technique. The grain god did not die because of the Xuanpu, read. Pin betrothal. The Xuanpu gate was the root of heaven and earth. It was continuous and did not need to be used diligently. This move was called Xuanpu. With the creation of yin and yang as the root, the 5 elements and 8 trigrams as the form, there were 8 moves. Xianxian was as strong as the sky and Dui said it was like rain. Li was as beautiful as the sun and shook like thunder. Sun entered like the wind and Kan sank like the water. Zhen stopped like the mountain and Kun was like the earth. The 8 moves swayed 64 times and the combination changed. The exquisite parts were endless and the intricate parts were intertwined. Xianxia was now using the first move. Sword raising technique. Sword raising 6 dragons to heaven, grand universe. This sword technique was also the most precious treasure of the heavenly evolution divine sect, but very few people used it. The reason was not that it was not good. Instead, it was because it was too good that very few people used it. After all, things like cultivation techniques, just like feelings, what was suitable for oneself was the best. The Xuanpu sword technique was not suitable for Xianxia. On one hand, it was because Xianxi's cultivation was not enough. On the other hand, it was because this sword technique was very large and required one to use all their strength. This also meant that the Xuanpu sword technique was not suitable for ordinary battles. It was only suitable for a desperate fight at the end of the road. Therefore, the moment Xianxia drew his sword, the entire sky seemed to darken. 6 golden sword lights surrounded Xianxia. The sword hilts were below and the sword tips were pointing to the sky. Like 6 hungry leeches, they crazily sucked out a huge amount of true yuan from Xianxi's body, causing Xianxi's aura to become much weaker in an instant. If it wasn't for the fact that he was forcing himself to look calm and composed, everyone present would have mistakenly thought that he was afraid. The 5 divine generals' Dharma treasures arrived with a loud bang. Xianxi's sword lights also shot out in all directions. There were only 5 enemies, but there were 6 sword lights. Even if each person had 1 sword, there would still be 1 sword left. Therefore, Xianxia shot the 6th sword at Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was sitting in the imperial hall. It was impolite to not return the favor. The moment the Xuanpu sword technique appeared, who could compete with it? The vast and continuous sword lights were as strong and hot as the sun. The moment the Dharma treasures of the 5 divine generals came into contact with the sword lights, they immediately trembled and let out a series of wung 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 sorrowful cries. Then, under the shocked expressions of the 5 divine generals, the 5 sword lights showed an unstoppable force and at the same time sent the 5 grade 9 spiritual treasures flying. Then they continued to shoot towards their location. Chapter 418. Raising Sword Style. Sword raises 6 dragons to conquer the heavens, Great Qian Yuan. Since this place was called Dragon Head Peak, Xianxia was going to trample the dragon head under his feet today. Sword chi spread for 30,000 miles. Purple chi in green robe flowing east. On Dragon Head Peak. Ultimate Emperor Palace. Everyone please follow me, riding a horse with a sword singing to the ends of the earth. After the sword radiance shot out, the 5 divine generals cried out in pain in unison. Then the 5 of them flew back in the direction they came from at an even faster speed. In an instant, everyone was shocked. But what was even more surprising was that, just as the 5 divine generals were pushed back, a golden sword light brazenly pierced through the square and shot toward the imperial hall where the celestial venerables were with an earth-shattering momentum. At this moment, Yuhuan Tianzuan, who had been sitting cross-legged in the palace with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes with a trace of surprise on his face. The sword radiance seemed to have split the void, so much so that when the sword approached the ultimate emperor palace, the bottom of the palace began to tremble slightly as if there was an earthquake. A battle between experts happened in the blink of an eye. Yuhuan Tianzuan frowned and a trace of displeasure flashed across his face. He seemed to be blaming the 5 divine generals for their negligence, so when he saw that the sword radiance was about to shoot into the ultimate emperor palace, he immediately raised his hand and summoned the magic treasure that made him famous, the Jade World Glazed Cup. This lamp was in the shape of a tower, narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. There was an inextinguishable golden flame in it, known as the Myriad Spirits Ancient E. This magic treasure constantly revolved around Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan, so its name could be said to be known by everyone in the great world. However, although this magic treasure was famous, not many people had seen its true power. After all, Yuhuan Tianzuan was the leader of the celestial venerables of the 10 directions, so how could he casually fight with others? Therefore, when Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan took out the Jade World Glazed Cup, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Venerate Xuanzhen couldn't help but be surprised. When they looked at the sword light again, even their eyes couldn't help but change. In their perception, although this sword light was coming menacingly, the sword force was not released, so the 2 celestial venerables were unable to accurately judge its power. Then, under the gazes of the 3 celestial venerables, the Jade World Glazed Cup flew out of the Emperor Extreme Palace and collided with the sword beam. Bang! An invisible force swept across the square, and waves of air that were as sharp as steel blades spread out in all directions. The energy hit the restrictions of the Imperial Extreme Palace and instantly shot out 10,000 rays of divine light. At that moment, the dragon head sang loudly and multicolored light filled the sky. The 5 divine generals retreated one after another. The Rakshasa Star Sovereign was at a loss. This scene was very much like a forest where gunshots rang out. Frightened birds fluttered about and flew away. The originally orderly square had become noisy because of this. It was as noisy as a market. How dare you? Yuhuan Tianzuan was furious. After a stern shout, he leaped out of the Imperial Extreme Palace. The berserk true essence that had been triggered by the exchange of blows between the 2 of them had also completely disappeared. It was as if nothing had happened. Everyone kept quiet out of fear and returned to their original positions, not daring to make any more noise. There is no such person as you in the world. Who exactly are you? Yuhuan Tianzuan hovered above the square, lowered his head and sized up Xianxia before asking in a deep voice. Hearing this, the corners of Xianxi's mouth curled up slightly. Then he mimicked Yuhuan Tianzuan and slowly flew up from the ground. Only when he was at the same height as Yuhuan Tianzuan did Xianxia reply with a calm expression, "This humble one is Xianxia from the lower realms." As soon as these words came out, everyone, including Yuhuan Tianzuan, was shocked. Tiandu was extremely particular about rules. As long as a celestial master was present, no one was allowed to make the slightest noise. It was precisely because of this that no matter how shocked the divine generals were, they were like wooden men standing in the square in a daze, silent and looking straight ahead. Lower realms? How is that possible? Yuhuan Tianzuan muttered to himself. Then he suddenly opened his right hand and called the Jade Huan Glazed Cup over again. In the probing exchange just now, Yuhuan Tianzuan was actually at a disadvantage. Of course, it could also be said that Yuhuan Tianzuan did not use his true strength, so Xianxia was lucky enough to take advantage of it. But one had to know that this advantage was not something that anyone could take advantage of. So, this stranger who claimed to be from the lower realms was actually at the celestial master level? How was that possible? The first thought that flashed through Yuhuan Tianzuan's mind was that it was impossible. But then, Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to have suddenly thought of something and his expression suddenly turned cold. He stared at Xianxia and asked in a deep voice, "You're from the lower realms? Could it be, you're the one who destroyed the 5-directional sacred palace?" After hearing this, Xianxi's face suddenly stiffened and he replied somewhat embarrassedly, "It's a misunderstanding, it's all a misunderstanding." At this time, Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Venerable Xuanzhen also flew out of the Imperial Extreme Palace. Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell heard the conversation between the 2, so before Yuhuan Tianzuan could continue asking, he could not help but ask, In that case, Chongli died at your hands? Chongli was a divine general after all. How could he have died silently in the lower realms? Since this person in front of him had the strength of a heavenly venerable, and at the same time said that he was from the lower realms, in that case everything made sense. Faced with heavenly venerable wondrous spells criticism, Xianxia suddenly did not know how to answer. And his hesitation, it also indirectly confirmed the guesses of the three heavenly venerables. Therefore the scene that could barely be considered harmonious suddenly became like a gas station on fire. It exploded in an instant. Yuan Tianzuan's pupils shrank and then he muttered in a very strange tone, "So it's you, destroying the foundation of the divine ancestor, cutting off the path of my heavenly capital, Chongli, Qingwan, Baihong, Shuixiang, and my son Wuxia." The moment he mentioned the two words Wuxia, Yuan Tianzuan clearly paused for a moment. Then an uncontrollable anger flashed in his eyes. In a moment of agitation, Yuan Tianzuan no longer had the sage-like aura of the past. He was like an enraged lion. He bared his teeth and his beard and hair stood on end. "You committed all kinds of monstrous crimes in the lower realms, and today you actually dare to come to my Dragon Head Peak to cause trouble? Do you really think that there's no one in my heavenly capital? Hateful. Hateful. Since you're bent on courting death, this old man will make an exception today and send you on your way. You little thief, hand over your life." Before he finished speaking, the jade world glazed cup in Yuan Tianzuan's hand was like a meteor, drawing a streak of light in the air, and then ruthlessly smashed towards Xianxia. Chapter 419. If emotions could be expressed in reality, then Xianxia would definitely send countless black question marks to Yuan Tianzuan. What was going on? Why was the development of things completely different from what he had imagined? Xianxia originally thought that as long as he displayed the strength of a heavenly venerable, Tiandu would give him a high standard of reception. Who would have thought? After he displayed his strength before he could even say a few words, Yuan Tianzuan directly flipped the table and turned hostile. In a rage, Yuan Tianzuan directly smashed the jade huan glazed cup heavily at Xianxia. And at this time this treasure that was famous in Tiandu, just now it fully displayed its true power to the world. Glazed hellfire, a sky lantern. Burning to the 8 wastelands 10,000 spirits anciently. The moment the jade huan glazed cup flew out, this magic treasure was like a Kongming lantern that had been ignited, floating toward Xianxia with raging flames. As the glazed cup got closer and closer to Xianxia's position, the fire was so big that it could be said to be burning the prairie and the sky. Because Dragon Head Peak was protected by the array, the fire did not rush out of the array, but raged and burned crazily inside the array. As a result, many Star Lords with lower cultivation were scared out of their wits on the spot, and could only shrink in the corner of the square and tremble. But what made people feel strange was, the raging flames filled the sky and swept through the square at the same time. The raging flames attached to everyone, but they could not feel the slightest bit of heat from it, as if the monstrous flames were just an illusion. Seeing this, everyone immediately felt a lot more at ease, so they all turned to look at the unlucky intruder. Where did this guy come from? He could actually make Yuan Tianzuan disregard his status and angrily teach him a lesson. Unlike the previous probing exchange, Yuan Tianzuan attacked with all his strength this time. So the moment Xianxia saw the glazed cup smashing toward him, his brows immediately furrowed tightly. To be honest, Xianxia didn't expect Yuan Tianzuan to be so aggressive. Although he had indeed caused a lot of trouble for Heaven Capital when he was on Earth, it was all out of self-defense, so Xianxia had always felt that, as long as he could have a good talk with Tiandu, there would still be room for mediation. However, Xianxia's idea was good. However, the other party didn't listen to him and came at him aggressively. They didn't even give him a chance to explain. What happened? You've become a victim? The life and death of the love of my life is uncertain. My beloved daughter is still young and has no one to rely on. I went through a lot of hardships to return to Earth, but I didn't expect that after a few days of happiness, I would end up being separated from my family. How could Xianxia accept this? All of this was because of these damned ancient cultivators. Thinking of this, even though Xianxia had experienced 200 years of mental toughening in the dark space at this moment, a monstrous hatred rose in his heart. So the moment he saw the jade-glazed cup flying over, Xianxia immediately waved the godly sword Dharma power in his hand and pointed the sword at Yuan Tianzuan. At the same time he shouted sternly, I didn't want to be enemies with Heaven Capital, but you just had to be so aggressive. Heaven capital Heavenly Master, using your name to shout so loudly, am I really afraid of you? At the same time, the godly sword Dharma power in Xianxi's hand also danced. The long sword swept across the sky, stirring up a breeze like a ribbon. Strand after strand winding around Xianxi's body. The breeze blew the ends of his hair and also ruffled his clothes. There was no earth-shattering scene, but Xianxi's momentum suddenly rose along with the breeze. At the moment when the jade-glazed cup was about to hit him, Xianxi waved the long sword in his hand. If the sky was divided into two halves, then one side would be a raging flame and the other side would be a formless breeze. Mysterious sword formula. Changing sword style. Windy sky. A gentleman should be virtuous. When the flame met the breeze, the sun was just right and the breeze was not dry. If the great Qian Yuan was a strong heavy sword, then windy sky was a soft and long soft sword. The jade-glazed cup was like a fireball fiercely smashing toward Xianxi. However, just as the fireball was about to hit Xianxi, an invisible net of sword qi blocked it. Just like the moment when a football was shot into the goal frame, the fireball rolled in the net of sword qi for a while before finally helplessly turning into a wisp of black smoke and completely dissipating in the air. Then the net of sword qi also disappeared into nothingness. This move did not determine the winner or loser. Could be said that they were evenly matched. But it was also because of this heavenly venerable wondrous spell heavenly venerable Xuanzhen and countless divine generals and star lords watching the battle in the square. Everyone was shocked by the strength Xianxi displayed at this moment. There was actually someone in this world who could fight Yuhuan Tianzuan to a draw. What kind of joke was this? Yuhuan Tianzuan seemed to be a little surprised by Xianxi's strength. Seeing that his attack had no effect, he suddenly let out a long laugh. Interesting, I haven't fought with anyone for hundreds of years. Mr. Qin, right? Today this old man will remember your name first. Until the next day, I'll definitely not forget to place a memorial tablet for you in the Imperial Hall. As soon as he finished speaking, Yuhuan Tianzuan's figure flashed, and he charged toward Xianxi. It seemed that this heavenly venerable who was usually high and mighty, was really going to fight to his heart's content with Xianxi today. Seeing this, Xianxi did not cower in the slightest. So what if you're a heavenly venerable? I'll send you to heaven today. Take another strike from my sword. The jade world glazed cup's flames surged, and the divine general's Dharma idol's sword momentum was endless. The two heavenly venerable cultivators collided fiercely in midair just like that. In an instant, the dissipating true essence was like ice blades and frost, shooting in all directions without distinguishing between friend and foe. Many divine generals could not dodge in time and were immediately injured by the qi energy, causing countless small scratches to appear on their bodies. These scratches seemed weak and harmless, but in fact they carried the true essence imprints of Xianxi and Yuhuan Tianzuan. Therefore, the moment the qi energy entered their bodies, these injured divine generals cried out in pain and hurriedly dodged to the side, trying to circulate their energy to force the destructive qi energy out of their bodies. Seeing that the battle had affected many people, Heavenly Venerable Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Venerable Xuanzhen exchanged a look and immediately flew back to Imperial Zenith Hall. They took the initiative to close the protective array of Dragon Head Peak so that Xianxi and Yuhuan Tianzuan could fight more freely. As long as Yuhuan Tianzuan did not take the initiative to ask for help in this battle, no one could interfere. Although Heaven Capital was strong, it disdained to fight with many people, so it gave Xianxi such a relatively fair battlefield. This was a battle between heavenly venerables. It was also a battle between two heavenly venerables for their respective dignity. Although Xianxi did not come from the great world, he had successfully proved himself with his strength. He was not weaker than a heavenly venerable. Whether I'm wrong or not, I actually have some idea in my heart. You may not have noticed the title of each volume. This is the 4th volume and the title of this volume is, coincidentally, This Student is Young and in His Prime. Hey, the climax scenes in the past were too short, so can you let me write a longer one this time? Maybe I didn't write well enough, so I felt very bored. Please forgive me, everyone. Be more tolerant of this newbie so that the next book will be better. 3. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Edition website. Chapter 420. Titles like Yuhuan Tianzuan and Divine Lord of Dawn were just nicknames. Since the strength of the 5 divine generals was equivalent to the Yuanying stage, then the 10 heavenly lords were equivalent to the soul formation stage. The difference between the soul formation stage and the Yuanying stage seemed to be only one stage. But this difference could be said to be the difference between heaven and earth, the difference between clouds and mud. Using the orthodox cultivation heritage of the heavenly jade world as an example, after a cultivator had refined and accumulated their true yuan to a certain extent, they could refine this true yuan to a perfect state and form a golden core. After forming a golden core, the golden core became the foundation of a cultivator's cultivation, and at the same time, it was a hotbed for yuanying. It was like a seed that was scattered in the soil. As long as it was carefully cared for, it would eventually blossom and bear fruit. The flower that blossomed from the golden core, this was the so-called yuanying. Yuanying was formed from the transformation of the golden core. During the entire transformation process, the cultivator's 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls would gradually transfer from the heart to the yuanying. As long as the yuanying was not extinguished, the soul would not dissipate. It was also because of this that even if a cultivator's physical body was destroyed during the yuanying stage, they could still use the yuanying to possess another body and obtain a new life. Qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core, yuanying, soul formation, void. If the Qi refinement stage was the starting point for one to enter the immortal sect, then the foundation establishment and golden core stages were actually just a process of continuous consolidation. Cultivation was also mainly about refining the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and refining one's own true yuan. In fact, even though the golden core stage was called a heavenly man, they had not truly entered the next level of qualitative change. Only after a cultivator had formed yuanying and merged their soul with the yuanying would they truly begin to undergo a second qualitative change. Therefore, the entire process from Qi refinement to golden core was also called transforming essence into Qi. There were no shortcuts on the path of cultivation. It could be said that one had to take one step at a time. This aspect had not been mentioned before because those below the semi-god realm were nothing but ants. Divine generals seemed high and mighty, but in Xianxi's eyes, there wasn't much difference between divine generals and celestials. After all, transforming energy into Qi was only the first stage. Only when a cultivator broke through to the yuanying stage and began to explore the threshold of the soul formation stage, would they officially step into the second stage, which was refining Qi into spirit. Everything was easy to learn but difficult to master. Cultivation was no exception. It took Xianxi 500 years to progress from the Qi refinement stage to the soul formation stage. Compared to those old freaks who spent thousands of years to reach the soul formation stage, this cultivation speed was already very terrifying. But even with Xianxi's outstanding talent for cultivation, after reaching the divine transformation stage, it would be extremely difficult to make further breakthroughs. Because at this level, refining essence into Qi was no longer the main point. Refining Qi into spirit was the main point. The so-called divinity transformation was to fuse yuanying with the divine soul, allowing it to undergo a qualitative change and form, primordial spirit. Golden core, yuanying, primordial spirit. This was a transformation that every cultivator had to go through. Xianxi's cultivation had already reached the peak of the soul formation stage, only one step away from the insightful emptiness stage. So what he really had to face now was understanding the true meaning of the word void, understanding the first law of heaven and earth, and undergoing another qualitative change. This was something at the next level. Xianxi had yet to understand it, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was naturally far from it. Let's talk about the Dragon Head Peak first. After Yuhuan Tianzuan charged at Xianxi, the two immediately engaged in an all-out battle. The intensity of a battle at this level was completely beyond everyone's imagination. There was no concept of planets in the great world. After leaving the floating island, there was only the endless void left. Therefore, after Heavenly Lord Wondrous spells closed the protective array, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately lured Xianxi into the depths of the void to prevent the battle from reaching the Imperial Zenith Hall. Without the restriction of the venue, the battle instantly became more intense. Heavenly Lord Wondrous spells and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen led a group of divine generals and celestial lords to watch the battle from afar. This battle shocked the entire great world. Almost everyone was watching this battle between heavenly venerables. The glazed glass lamp was blazing with red flames, and the divine general's Dharma idol sword shadows were endless. Astral winds blew and divine light fluttered. The void trembled and everyone looked down. If the floating island's protective array formation had not been personally set up by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, it would have been destroyed by the shockwaves from their battle. And as Yuhuan Tianzuan gradually revealed his full strength, Qinshi also fell into a disadvantage. This was the first time Qinshi was so passive in a battle since returning to Earth. On one hand, it was because he had not recovered to his peak state. On the other hand, it was entirely because of the jade-glazed glass lamp in Yuhuan Tianzuan's hand. In any case, Yuhuan Tianzuan was the leader of the 10 heavenly venerables. At the same time, he also had the help of a supreme treasure like the jade-glazed glass lamp. Qinshi was alone and did not even have a weapon to back him up. Thus he did not dare to face him head-on. Thus Qinshi could only retreat as he fought. He tried to find Yuhuan Tianzuan's weakness in the battle and defeat him in one fell swoop. After a fierce battle, Qinshi had a rough idea of Yuhuan Tianzuan's strength. Although this old man's cultivation was high, it was obvious that he was slightly inferior. He was about the mid-stage soul formation. It was unknown whether it was because the great world was too peaceful, but Yuhuan Tianzuan's combat experience was clearly inferior to Qinshi's because he had not experienced blood and fire. Thus, Qinshi decided to show weakness to his enemy and silently look for an opportunity. If he was strong, he would be strong. If he was tyrannical, he would be tyrannical. When Yuhuan Tianzuan saw that Qinshi kept retreating, he mistakenly thought that Qinshi was afraid of fighting. Thus he did not think much and immediately stepped up his attack, trying to create pressure for Qinshi. But what Yuhuan Tianzuan did not expect was, just as he threw out the glazed glass lamp again, Qinshi's eyes suddenly lit up. Found it. All the threats came from the jade-glazed glass lamp. If Yuhuan Tianzuan had kept the glazed glass lamp by his side and personally went forward to fight with Qinshi might have some scruples. But now Yuhuan Tianzuan threw out the glazed glass lamp, trying to kill him with a supreme treasure. Such a reckless approach was exactly what Qinshi wanted to see happen. Thus, Qinshi immediately held his breath and focused, turning a blind eye to the glazed glass lamp in front of him. Instead he placed all his attention on Yuhuan Tianzuan. Just as the jade-glazed glass lamp was about to hit, Qinshi drew his sword. Changing sword style, Kuan to softness, even movement is hard. One had to know that the profound valley sword art was not a cultivation technique that Qinshi created himself. It was the culmination of a senior expert's lifetime of hard work, and then through the continuous refinement of the sect masters of the Heavenly Evolution Divine Sect, it was a classic that had been handed down for generations. The profound valley sword art was exquisite beyond compare. The sword started from Taiji and divided into yin and yang. The 4 trigrams of yang were Qian Dui Li Zhen. The 4 trigrams of yin were Sun Kan Zhen Kuan. The 3 trigrams of yang went against the sword, and the 3 trigrams of yin went with the sword. When released, it covered heaven and earth and hid yin and yang unfathomable. The 6 trigrams of qi shook heaven and earth, and the 4 trigrams of qi went against the flow. The 4 trigrams of the sun and moon and the stars changed when moved. Qinshi had pretended to be weak in order to use this killer move. Thus, the moment he drew his sword, the surging true essence immediately affected the qi, and an intense killing intent instantly filled the endless void where the two of them were. Yuhuan Tianzuan sensed that something was wrong and hurriedly wanted to withdraw the glazed glass lamp. But at this moment Qinshi had already swung the sword in his hand. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com. Wonderful Book Mobile Version Website. .com. Chapter 421. Kuan was the softest, and when it moved it was the strongest. The moment this sword was swung out, an aurora appeared in the sky of the great world for the first time. Looking at it from afar, it was so beautiful and dazzling, full of colors. Against the endless void, the sword shadows that filled the sky were like colorful ribbons. Ying gently floated toward Yuhuan Tianzuan along with the breeze. Then the sword shadows collided with the burning jade world glazed cup. But what was surprising was that the sword shadows were like ripples of water. The moment they touched the jade world glazed cup, they immediately split and floated to the sides, as if they were actively making way for the cup. The jade world glazed cup smashed toward Qinshi like a hot knife through butter. Meanwhile, the sword shadows circled around the lamp and gracefully drifted toward heavenly venerable Yuhuan. And this was the opportunity that Qinshi had been waiting for a long time. At the cost of taking a hit from the glazed cup in exchange for a chance to hit Yuhuan Tianzuan with a sword. A sword for a cup. It seemed like there was no difference, but in fact Xianxia had profited. As the saying went, those who were barefoot were not afraid of those who were wearing shoes. He was an old bachelor. If it was purely a competition of Dharma treasures, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. Therefore, the strategy of harming the enemy while harming himself was clearly the best strategy. Therefore, by the time Yuhuan Tianzuan realized something was wrong, it was already too late for him to take back the glazed cup. As a result, Yuhuan Tianzuan could only watch as the sword shadows, which were like huge waves on the sea, came crashing toward him. Boom! With a loud boom, a magnificent scene similar to that of a planet exploding appeared before everyone's eyes. Along with the blazing light produced by the explosion, billions of needle-like rays of light shot into everyone's eyes. These rays of light still contained the true essence of the two celestial venerables, so when they entered their eyes, it gave people a heart-wrenching pain. Among them, those with lower cultivation levels were pierced by the qi on the spot, causing blood to seep out of their eye sockets. Except for the two Empyreans, Miao Fa and Xianxia, almost everyone was affected by the aftermath of the battle. The surging true yuan wreaked havoc in the boundless void, causing the 120,000 floating islands to tremble. The heavens of the great world, it was going to collapse. Fortunately, every floating island had a protective formation left behind by the divine ancestor, so no matter how intense the battle was, it had very little effect on the residents of the islands. When the strong light began to weaken, everyone turned their heads, wanting to know the result of this battle as soon as possible. As everyone looked over, they could see that Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan was still facing off against the unknown invader in the distant void. It was as if nothing had happened. It was as if the victor had not been decided yet. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help but sigh. This was indeed a battle between Heavenly Venerables. From the looks of it, it would be impossible to determine the victor in a short period of time. However, just as everyone was looking forward to a more exciting battle scene, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood essence. Then he pointed at Xianxia in horror and sighed. "Where did you come from? It's impossible for an expert like you to appear in the lower realm." Impossible. After this battle, Yuhuan Tianzuan finally saw Xianxia's true ability. If he didn't have a defensive magic treasure on him, this sword might have left a mark on his body. Even so, this sword still hurt Yuhuan Tianzuan so much so that his breathing was obviously a little irregular and the blood in his chest was constantly surging. "Can we sit down and talk now?" Xianxia didn't directly answer Yuhuan Tianzuan's question. After he withdrew the divine general celestial body in his hand, he made an inviting gesture to Yuhuan Tianzuan, giving Yuhuan Tianzuan enough face. After all, unless it was absolutely necessary, Xianxia really didn't want to use force to solve the problem. However, what Xianxia didn't expect was that, after hearing his words, Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. Then he suddenly sent a voice transmission to the two heavenly venerables, Miaofa and Xuanzhen. "This thief is tricky. Please lend me a hand and take him down." Hearing this, heavenly venerables Miaofa and Xuanzhen couldn't help but look at each other. They seemed to have some concerns in their hearts. It was not that they didn't want to help, but because of their status, they felt that it was a little difficult. After all, the three of them were the high and mighty heavenly venerables of the 10 directions. Now they actually wanted to join forces to attack one person. What would the onlookers think? As heavenly venerables, did they have any shame? Seeing that the two of them were hesitating, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately added, "This person's origin is unknown. You have seen the moves that he used just now. His cultivation method seems to be more exquisite than the great clear orthodoxy left behind by the divine ancestor. Therefore, I suspect that he didn't come from the lower realm at all but from somewhere else. This person has a big secret on him. If he can fall into our hands, it will be a great thing. I ask the two of you to help me capture him. Don't let him escape." At this point, if heavenly venerables Miaofa and Xuanzhen still didn't express their opinions, they wouldn't be giving Yuhuan Tianzuan any face. Moreover, after watching the battle just now, the two of them had developed a great interest in the Dark Valley sword technique that Xianxia used. Therefore, after looking at each other, they directly rushed toward Xianxia. Anyway, the 10 directions heavens had already lost all their face. What was the point of saying so much nonsense? As long as they captured this person, they could find a random reason to explain it to the onlookers. From the beginning to the end, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't want to negotiate with Xianxia. On one hand it was because of Wuxia's death. On the other hand it was completely because an ordinary man was innocent but treasuring a jade ring was a crime. She contended empty-handed against Emperor Yuhuan who wielded a supreme treasure. Even so he still held the upper hand. Therefore Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't need to think with his but to know. Xi's cultivation method was definitely stronger than the great clear orthodoxy. How could he not be tempted? Everyone wanted to improve, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was no exception. Therefore a scene that made everyone's jaws drop happened. 3 heavenly venerables actually attacked that unknown intruder at the same time. Was this a group attack because they couldn't win in a one-on-one fight? Xi's condition wasn't very good to begin with. In the battle just now, although he was lucky enough to win against Yuhuan Tianzuan, he had also used up most of his energy. Now that he saw the 3 heavenly venerables charging at him at the same time, Xi's first thought was to run. However, as soon as this thought appeared, it was immediately thrown out of his mind. He couldn't run. Ying was still waiting for him to save her. The soul mirror was in the square outside the Imperial Hall, so even if he died today he had to smash that broken mirror first. Alright, the updates were not good enough. Even breathing was wrong. Big bosses, I was wrong. You read a lot, so of course you know the traditional cultivation realms, but some readers don't know. As a salted fish, I really don't dare to promise how much I will update every day. I also don't want to lie to you and paint a big picture for you. In short, under the situation of maintaining daily updates, I'll update as much as I can. Look, I updated early today so I can save 300 more words there at night. Chapter 422. Deep in the Void. The 3 heavenly lords no longer cared about their identities and attacked Xianxia with all their might. What was originally a one-on-one duel had now become a 3-on-1 brawl. It had been a long time since such a grand event had happened in the great world. Everyone hid on their own floating islands and watched as the 4 heavenly venerables engaged in a chaotic battle. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's cultivation were slightly lower than Yuhuan Tianzuan's. They were about the early stage of the soul formation realm. Using the soul formation realm as an example, each realm could be roughly divided into the early stage, the middle stage, the late stage, and the peak stage, which was only half a step away from the next realm. Although Xianxia had already stepped into the peak of the soul formation realm, he had never recovered to his peak state. Moreover, he did not have any magic treasures on him. Therefore, when he was surrounded by 2 early-stage soul formation and 1 mid-stage soul formation, he suddenly felt a little powerless. He could barely deal with the attacks of the 3 of them, let alone counterattack. Although Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's cultivation were slightly lower, their magic treasures were also extraordinary. The Jade Huan glazed lamp was already powerful enough. However, if Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell's 8-view palace lantern and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's coffin lamp were added, these 3 magic treasures that looked like lanterns combined to form a top-notch treasure that could shake the entire heaven capital. The 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. Among them, the Jade Huan glazed lamp was heaven, the 8-view palace lantern was earth, and the coffin lamp was man. Similar to the Jade Huan glazed lamp, there was a flame in the 8-view palace lantern called the sky-burning purple flame. There was also a flame in the coffin lamp called the netherworld ghost flame. If the Jade Huan glazed lamp's myriad spirit ancient was added, then the 3 most powerful flames in the world were all here. Xianxia did not recognize these 3 magic treasures, so naturally he had never heard of the names of these 3 flames. However, his intuition told him that these 3 flames must not be touched. Once touched, the 3 flames would be like maggots in his bones. With his true essence as fuel, they would burn him to ashes. The 3 of them held the flames in their hands and pressed on. Xianxia defended himself with his sword and retreated as he fought. Every time the 2 sides clashed, it was like fireworks on New Year's Eve, constantly blooming colorful lights in the void. Every time they clashed, the energy waves produced by their true yuan would constantly crash into the defensive formation of the 120,000 floating islands. For a moment, divine light filled the sky, shaking the void. What a magnificent scene! However, it was also in this seemingly gorgeous scene that a murderous aura was lurking. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause Xianxia to meet a tragic end. Xianxia had no chance of winning. However, he did not run away. Instead, he used all of his strength to fight against the 3 celestial venerables at the same time. He didn't want to defeat the 3 of them. Instead, he wanted to use the floating dawn mirror. Since it was for Ying, It was also for Nian. Thus, without the three celestial venerables noticing, Xianxia gradually pulled the battlefield to the vicinity of Dragon Head Peak. They were so close that the onlookers on the island could even clearly see the different expressions on their faces. The battle lasted for a long time. Xianxia also persisted for a long time. When the three celestial venerables once again released the heaven, earth and man lanterns at the same time, Xianxia's true essence was obviously insufficient. This caused his sword to be slower by a beat, allowing the three heaven, earth and man lanterns to successfully reach him. In an instant, true essence surged and flames burst forth. The three heaven, earth and man lanterns hit Xianxia's chest at the same time, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Then, like a meteor falling to earth, his entire body was on fire as he fiercely smashed into the square of Dragon Head Peak from the sky. Seeing this, the heavenly generals and star venerables on the square instantly scattered like frightened beasts. What kind of joke was this? These were the three legendary heaven-burning divine fires. Just a little bit of it would probably cripple one's entire life. Thus, after Xianxia's entire body was on fire and he heavily smashed into the ground like a meteor, he was the only one left in this huge square in an instant. If not for the protection of the array on the ground, he would probably have smashed a meteor crater on the spot. This person has a shocking cultivation, but unfortunately he fell here today. Although he's our enemy, this old man can't help but feel pity for him. What a pity, what a pity! After retrieving the 8 scenic palace lanterns, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell turned to look at the flames below. Seeing Xianxia's aura gradually weakening, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell couldn't help but sigh. Today this person fought 1 against 3. Even if he unfortunately fell, it could be considered a glorious death. Whether friend or foe, just based on this strength alone, this person was enough to win the respect he deserved. While Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell felt sorry for Xianxia, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't seem to feel the same way. Because he had fought Xianxia the most, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't relax in the slightest even after Xianxia had been hit by the 3 lanterns. Instead, he felt that this matter was rather strange. It wasn't that he was very clear about Xianxia's strength. It was just a simple intuition. If it weren't for his pride, Yuhuan Tianzuan probably wouldn't have been able to resist the urge to deliver a few more blows. The 3 heavenly venerates flew in the air, each pondering something as they looked at the flames. However, at this moment, Xianxia made his move. Originally on the verge of death, he suddenly erupted with an earth-shattering aura and crawled up from the ground. Before the 3 heavenly venerates could react, Xianxia charged directly toward the soul mirror floating in the middle of the square. Oh no! We've been tricked. His target is the soul mirror. It was only now that Yuhuan Tianzuan truly understood Xianxia's objective, and he hurriedly hurled the jade-glazed cup in his hand. Yuhuan Tianzuan's reaction was quick enough. However, he was still a beat slower than Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell. As soon as Xianxia stood up, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell transmitted his voice to everyone in the square. Everyone, heed my command. Protect the soul mirror. Do not let this person near the soul mirror even if you have to perish. Many of the divine generals were already standing not far away from the soul mirror, so they immediately rushed toward it upon hearing Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell's command and charged toward Xianxia with all their might. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Xianxia ignored the raging flames on his body and pounced toward the soul mirror. Dozens of divine generals tried to stop him, but Xianxia roared with bloodshot eyes like a crazed beast, "Get out of my way!" Before he could finish his sentence, the true origin energy that was filled with blood and chi was like a huge fan. In an instant, the tens of original infant stage cultivators were sent flying. Back then, Zhao Zilong had entered and exited Changban 7 times. Today, Xianxia was going to enter and exit Dragon Head Peak 7 times as well. This was the so-called, where the sword points, the heart points. The road ahead is perilous. Even if there are millions of enemies, I will still press on. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com. The mobile version of wondrousbook.com.